Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of What If Naruto Was in Attack on Titan. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. A female voice spoke, belonging to a woman currently lying in bed. The woman had long, blood-red hair and purple eyes, which were now dark circles under them, as after several hours of labor, her children had been born. They were currently in her lap. They were triplets, 2 girls and a boy. All 3 had pale skin, like their mother. 2 of them had blonde hair, the boy and the younger girl. The eldest had black hair, which was strange since neither the woman nor the man she was speaking to had that hair color. Currently, the woman was wearing a hospital gown. They seem beautiful to me. What shall we name them? Kushina, said the man, whose name was Michael, but his wife affectionately called him Minato. The man had blonde hair and dark blue eyes, and wore a white long-sleeved button-down shirt, black pants, and shoes of the same color. Well, I already had the names chosen for 2 of them. The boy will be called Naruto and the younger girl Isabel, Kushina said with a sweet smile on her face as she doted on the 2 blondes who were fast asleep. Well, I think those are good names. That leaves me to choose the name of the older girl. Well, I think, because of her black hair, I will call her Diana in honor of my mother since she had the same hair color, said Michael with a smile, making Kushina nod at the name, and to their surprise Diana opened her eyes, revealing ruby-colored eyes which left both parents puzzled. That's strange, Minato-kun. As far as I remember, those eyes don't exist in my family, but in yours, Kushina said curiously, making Michael shake his head. They were about to continue investigating the matter when they heard a loud knocking on the door, which alarmed Kushina and Michael. Michael acted quickly and looked through a small hole in the door to see who it was, since they were currently in a location that not many people knew about, as it was one of the old bases of the Eldia restorers. Upon seeing who was on the other side of the door, he was surprised to find 10 uniformed and armed men, Marleyan soldiers. Michael reacted immediately, grabbing Kushina and the babies and leaving through a door leading to an underground tunnel. As they did so, the soldiers knocked down the door, but unfortunately for Kushina and Michael, the door they had exited through remained ajar, allowing the soldiers to follow their trail. Minato-kun, what are Marleyan soldiers doing here? As far as we knew, the Eldian restorers were keeping hidden, said Kushina, carrying Naruto and Isabel, while Michael carried Diana. I don't know, Kushina, but we must escape as soon as possible and inform Grisha about this, Michael said with a frown as they ran through the tunnels, or at least tried to, since Kushina was weak after childbirth, causing her to stop from time to time. After running through the tunnels, they emerged into an alley where they realized it was dark. Seeing no one around, they ran around trying to see if there was a nearby house open, but they were all closed and showed signs that the people inside were asleep. As they continued running, Kushina suddenly stopped, breathing irregularly. Michael also stopped to help his wife, but suddenly they both heard several footsteps heading towards them, and in a desperate act to save their children they placed them near some wooden boxes which belonged to a merchant. Please don't make any noise, okay? Mommy and Daddy will be here for you soon, Kushina said, on the verge of tears, while Michael nodded at what his sword was saying. The 3 babies seemed oblivious to what was happening around them. Meanwhile, Michael and Kushina caught the attention of the guards, who saw them when they turned around a corner. The babies felt nothing and saw nothing because they couldn't in the darkness of the night, but one thing was clear, none of their parents came back for the children that night. Time skip. 30 minutes later. After 30 minutes, the babies began to feel hungry and cold in the dark night, which caused them to start crying, attracting the attention of a woman who was passing by in the middle of the night. The woman was about 25 years old, had long black hair down to her lower back and pale skin. She wore a white button-down shirt with a coat over it, a knee-length skirt, and black shoes with sheer stockings. Oh, what are you little ones doing here all alone? The woman said softly, taking Naruto in her arms. The woman's warm touch calmed him, and his sisters did too. I don't see your parents around. I think I'll take care of you from now on, little ones. What are your names? The woman asked, searching their blankets for names. One of them, Diana, didn't have one, as her name had been chosen at the last minute. Naruto and Isabel, on the other hand, had their names embroidered on their blankets. Little one, it seems you don't have a name. I think I'll call you Lilith, the woman said with a smile as she picked up Lilith, Diana, and carried her siblings with her. I know it's illogical, but imagine how someone could carry 3 babies. Use your imagination, ladies and gentlemen. XD. Time skip. 10 years. Currently there were 3 children and a woman who were in a house in one of the Eldian ghettos in the city of Liberio. Currently they were having breakfast at the table since it was morning. Naruto, eat more slowly, you're going to choke, said a female voice, which belonged to the woman who had rescued them from freezing to death in the streets when they were babies. She seemed not to have changed in 5 years, she was still just as beautiful. The woman was wearing almost the same thing she had worn that time, only this time she wasn't wearing shoes or a coat. The boy she referred to as Naruto looked like a healthy 10-year-old with messy blonde hair, somewhat pale skin, and light blue eyes as clear as the sky. Currently, Naruto was wearing a white button-down long-sleeved shirt and gray pants with black shoes. Mom, I can't help it, I'm so excited because the warriors are coming home and I'll be able to see them, said Naruto with childlike excitement, which made the woman smile, but made the younger one frown. Brother, I'm excited too, but this doesn't mean you should choke on your food, so please eat slowly, okay? I don't want anything bad to happen to you, said a girl with long blonde hair that reached her lower back. She was wearing a light pink dress that highlighted her pale skin and purple eyes, and she also wore white children's shoes. It's okay, Isabel. Don't worry, your older brother won't choke to death, hehe, said Naruto, referring to the girl who, upon hearing his answer, gave a sweet smile which Naruto returned. If you want to arrive when they do, then you must hurry, Naruto, it's almost 10 o'clock, said a voice almost without emotion, which belonged to a girl, the older girl who had black hair down to her lower back and eyes as red as blood, currently wearing a long-sleeved white shirt like the woman who was with them, a skirt that reached her knees with knee-high socks and black shoes. Yes, I'm coming, Lilith. Ready, Naruto said excitedly, getting off the chair and running to the bathroom to brush his teeth. Then he ran to the door, but stopped when his mother called him. Naruto, wait for your sisters, they want to go see too, said the woman with a smile, making Naruto stop and nod. After a few moments, both Isabel and Lilith were ready at the door with Naruto, but before the three siblings could leave, the woman stopped them. Wait, don't forget your bandanas, the woman said with a small smile, placing a bandana on each of them, which was red with a yellow symbol. See you later, Mom, said Naruto as he placed his hand on the doorknob, ready to leave. Girls, take care of your brother, you know he can sometimes get into trouble, the woman said with a sweet smile, while the two girls nodded with sweet smiles. Just as Naruto was about to open the door, he stopped because suddenly an electric current passed through his entire body. Don't do it, Naruto heard a voice in his head, which made him stop suddenly and look at his sisters who were behind him and his mother. Did any of you say anything? Naruto asked, confused, making his mother look at him with a smile. Yes, I told your sisters to take care of you, after all, Lilith is older than you, the woman said with a smile, making Naruto look at her confused since that wasn't what he heard. No, that's not what. Never mind, let's go Isabel and Lilith, said Naruto, opening the door, and as he did so, both Isabel and Lilith took his left and right hands. Let's go, little brother, they both said, making Naruto smile, and they headed towards the plaza where the soldiers were about to enter. In a plaza where Eldians had free access, as it had been given by the Tiber family in an act of kindness, there was a large number of people eagerly awaiting the return of their relatives who had gone to war. Among all these people, Naruto and his sisters stood on wooden boxes that Naruto pulled with great effort so that his sisters could see. Here they come, said a voice in the crowd, causing everyone to look in one direction, and sure enough, in front of the crowd, a group of people entered the walls that enclosed the Eldians in Marley. Many of the people there shouted with excitement at the return of their relatives, but this soon ceased as everyone in the group had a somber expression, which made people worried. An older man in the crowd ran towards one of them who seemed to be the leader. He wore an open gray trench coat with a simple white t-shirt, black combat pants, and boots of the same color. The man was approximately 1.75 meters tall, had messy light brown hair, amber eyes, and had slightly tanned skin with a decent musculature. Commander, where is my son? I don't see him anywhere, the elderly man said to the man who was leading the group of people. Are you Joe's father? The brown-haired man asked with a serious expression, causing the man to nod with concern. Give it to him, said the group's commander, directing one of them to hand the man a container holding his son's ashes. Upon realizing what he had received, the elderly man couldn't help but shed tears of sorrow. Kneeling on the ground, he gripped the man's trench coat tightly. Tell me he died serving with honor. Please tell me his life was worth something, the old man said desperately, causing the commander to frown and avoid the man's gaze. I'm sorry, but we haven't made any progress. The eastern territories were taken from us, and no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't get them back. The other nations are evolving. Now they have fighter jets that are beyond our reach, the commander said desperately, but he was stopped by a man standing next to him. Sir, your son was a great help. Thanks to him, the casualties were minor. I think the commander is just a little tired, that's all, said the man, who appeared to be middle-aged. He wore glasses, had short, dark hair, a round face, and the traditional clothing of a warrior. He wore a red bandana on his arm with a yellow symbol on it. Tom, said the commander with a grateful look while the aforementioned simply nodded and let the other soldiers continue with their families, but of the large group only 6 of them went to another place. When the whole thing with the old man happened, Naruto and his sisters didn't understand what was going on, but later, when it was all over, Naruto noticed 6 of those people walking away. Curious, Naruto followed them, and unbeknownst to him, his sisters were right behind him. When the 6 people stopped, they were in a field that was for the exclusive use of the warriors within the ghetto, which was guarded by Marleyan soldiers, but apparently this time there were no soldiers nearby. When the 6 people entered the field, Naruto and his sisters also did so out of pure curiosity, but to their surprise when they entered none of the 6 people were inside the field. You know, kids, it's rude to follow people, said Tom Xaver, the man with glasses from a few moments ago, making the 3 children turn pale with fear and tense up, which made the man laugh. I'm sorry, sir, it was my fault, and I unintentionally attracted my sisters, said Naruto, lowering his head in shame. This made the other people in the field smile, except for one who, in a swift movement, grabbed Naruto's hair before Tom could do anything and forced his sky blue eyes to look at almost lifeless black eyes belonging to a young woman with blonde hair and milky skin. The woman was no more than 1.65 meters tall and wore a traditional warrior's uniform that revealed some cleavage. Oh, what do my eyes see? A small ant that I can step on, said the woman with a sadistic smile, but to her surprise, Naruto wasn't scared. He was simply holding back tears because the woman had grabbed his hair very tightly, which made the woman look at Naruto with a small smile when she saw that there wasn't even a trace of fear in Naruto's eyes. Okay, Evelyn, that's enough, you're hurting the child, said the commander, making Evelyn look at him, but she didn't let go of Naruto. Leave our brother alone, you wicked woman, Isabel said. Just as Evelyn turned towards the commander, Naruto's sisters acted, throwing a rock at Evelyn's head. Feeling the blow, she instinctively let go of Naruto, causing him to fall to his feet. He got up, and his sisters helped him to his feet. He then approached Evelyn, who was bleeding from her forehead, but none of the warriors seemed to care. Hey, miss, are you all right? Naruto asked, concern in his voice. Evelyn looked at him and crouched down to his level, frowning, trying to intimidate him. Naruto watched in astonishment as the blood on Evelyn's forehead began to evaporate and disappear. Out of pure curiosity, Naruto placed his small hand on Evelyn's forehead. At the touch, Evelyn felt an electric current throughout her body, leaving her stunned. But after a moment, she processed it and, with a nostalgic smile, kissed Naruto on the forehead. This surprised the warriors, and not only that, but she also picked him up, making her laugh. Wow, that's not something you see every day, Evelyn. Likes a boy. I thought she hated them, said a middle-aged man with dark brown hair, brown eyes, and slightly tanned skin. The man was considerably tall, standing at 1.80 meters. He wore the warrior's uniform with the same bandana as the others, but apart from that, he had a slight scar on his cheek. You said it, John, this is really strange, don't you think, Commander? Said another man who looked middle-aged, with dark red hair and brown eyes. He wore the same warrior uniform as everyone else, but his shirt was open, revealing a white t-shirt underneath. He also had the same bandana around his arm. Well, there's always a first time for everything, Sebastian, said the commander with a small smile. As he said those words, Naruto's sisters ran towards Evelyn and tried to hit her legs with all their might to make Evelyn let go of their brother. Let go of our brother, you wicked woman, Isabel said as Lilith nodded. Evelyn, feeling the taps on her legs, looked at both girls and then at Naruto, who nodded with a smile, making Evelyn smile and put Naruto down. The moment he was put down, he was approached by his 2 sisters, who glared at Evelyn, who smiled at them. He, stop fighting already. What are you kids doing here in the warriors training camp? You know you shouldn't be here, right? Tom said with a smile, making the children lower their heads in embarrassment. But Naruto, noticing something, looked at the group with excitement, which made the commander raise an eyebrow. You are warriors, right? What powers do you each have? Naruto said excitedly, making Tom smile, as well as Evelyn, who ruffled her hair. Ha, you should ask our name first, but anyway, my name is Tom Xaver and I possess the power of the Beast Titan, said Tom with a smile, making Naruto and Isabel excited, while Lilith smiled at how excited her little brothers were. Well, my name is Evelyn Smith, I possess the power of the female Titan, Evelyn said with a smile, but her eyes were fixed on Naruto, something that did not go unnoticed by the other warriors, but they ignored it. My name is John Walker, I possess the power of the colossal Titan, said the tall man named John with a smile towards the children who were excited to hear John. So you can turn into a super tall Titan, right? Isabel said excitedly, making John scratch his head in embarrassment and nod with a smile at the girl. My name is Sebastian Johnson, I possess the power of the quadruped Titan, said the red-haired man with a smile, causing both Isabel and Lilith to look at each other confused, but Naruto looked at him with excitement. So you can carry twice your weight and also survive in your Titan form for several months, right? Naruto said with an excited smile, which surprised the warriors since not everyone knew this. Well, it seems you've gained a fan, Sebastian. Anyway, my name is Elaine Smith, I possess the power of the Jaw Titan, said a young woman with black hair that reached her lower back. She had amber eyes that only reflected boredom, and she wore the uniform of the warriors with their respective armband. Wait, you're Smith. Does that mean the evil lady is your sister? Lilith said curiously, making Evelyn and Elaine nod. I am the commander of the warriors. My name is Vladimir Braun and I possess the power of the armored titan, said the commander, causing Naruto and his sisters to be surprised by the position and power that this man held. Wow. When I grow up I want to be a warrior so I can protect my people and my family, just like you do, said Naruto with a look full of determination, which was spoiled when Evelyn ruffled his hair, making him smile. Hee hee. If that's your dream, little one, I think you can achieve it, Vladimir said with a small smile, while the other warriors smiled back at him. How do they manage to transform into titans? Said Naruto with a smile as he sat on the ground while Evelyn copied him, and in a move that surprised the other warriors, she carried Naruto in her lap, something that the younger blonde didn't mind. Well, it's a bit difficult to explain, but it all comes from the coordinate, Vladimir said, copying Naruto and sitting on the ground. He looked at the three little ones who were near Evelyn, since Isabel was sitting to her left and Lilith to her right, while Naruto was on her lap. The coordinate, Lilith said doubtfully, making Sebastian nod and sit down as well, along with the other warriors. If it is the origin of all our powers, since when the Eldian ray falls it brings with it all the bones and flesh that form each of our titans, the Eldian ray is the path that connects us with the coordinate, Sebastian said mystically, making the three children concentrate on listening to the explanation. Wow, the coordinates are fantastic, said Naruto, making the warriors nod, but suddenly Evelyn realized something. Wait, we introduced ourselves, but you haven't. Don't you think you should? Evelyn said, making Naruto look at her curiously, which made her smile. Well, my name is Naruto. My younger sister's name is Isabel, said Naruto, pointing to Isabel who was to Evelyn's left. When she had their attention, she looked away in embarrassment and waved, which made Vladimir and Sebastian laugh. And this is my older sister, Lilith. We're triplets and we're 10 years old, Naruto said with a friendly smile as he pointed to Lilith who was to Evelyn's right. Ha ha ha, at 10 and already getting into trouble, said John with a smile, making the three children smile as if they didn't care. Guys, I think you should leave here. The Marley guards won't be long in returning, and it's almost noon. Your mother must be waiting for you, Tom said with a carefree smile, making the three children nod. Yes sir, you're right, said Naruto, getting up from Evelyn's lap, causing her to frown slightly. See you later, we'll come back to visit you, Isabel said with a friendly smile, making the warriors nod in agreement. See you later, friends, you wicked lady, said Lilith, pulling Naruto and Isabel along, while the warriors smiled at the siblings' interaction. When the triplets had left, Vladimir sighed and looked at Tom, who smiled while shrugging his shoulders. Am I the only one who's going to ask? Why was Evelyn being so affectionate with the child? Sebastian said with a confused look as he pointed at Evelyn, who looked at him coldly. Jealous. Did a kid beat you, huh Sebastian? Ha ha ha, said John with a mocking smile on his face, making Sebastian snort. But taking that question seriously. Evelyn, could you explain? Vladimir said hesitantly, making the blonde look at him and nod. The boy is a Fritz. When he touched my forehead I could see my teacher's memories. Evelyn said seriously, causing the warriors to gasp in surprise. Should we tell our superiors? John said, unsure of what they should do next. They're just children. Do you know what the government would do to those little ones if they knew they had royal blood? Tom said, frowning at what his companion wanted to do. So you're saying we should betray our nation? Sebastian said with a frown, causing several of the warriors to tense up. I'm not saying we should betray her, but do you want those children killed or worse? Tom said, frowning, making Vladimir look at him. Tom, I know you lost your wife and your son, but don't get things mixed up. The royal family shouldn't be within these walls, Vladimir said with a frown, causing both Elaine and Evelyn to frown at his words. Don't get things mixed up. Tell me, Commander, if your 7-year-old nephew were in mortal danger, would you turn a blind eye just because it's Marley's will? Tom said, frowning, making Vladimir fall silent. TCH, so what do you propose, Tom? Lie to our superiors and tell them we didn't see any royal children here. Sebastian said with a frown, making Tom and Elaine look at him. Or just say nothing about it, it's much easier, Elaine said with an emotionless look, making Tom nod while the others did the same, although Sebastian didn't seem very sure. With Naruto and his sisters. Currently, Naruto was walking through the streets with Isabel and Lilith, heading towards his house, but something suddenly caught their attention. The front door was open. Deciding to investigate, Naruto and his sisters entered the house and went to the dining room where they heard a noise. Upon entering, they found 2 soldiers, one of whom was sitting and the other standing seriously behind him. Naruto's mother was also sitting in front of the soldier with a sweet smile, but Naruto immediately noticed that his mother was tense. We're home, Isabel said with a smile, making the adults pay attention. The moment she said those words, her mother looked at her with fear, and the soldiers analyzed the three children. Welcome children. Lunch will be ready in a few minutes, said the woman with a nervous smile, while the soldier who had been sitting stood up. Well, I think it's time to leave, Miss Madeline. Remember to consider our offer, said the soldier as he left the house with his companion. Mom, what were you talking about? Naruto asked curiously, sitting down at the table along with his sisters, who were also curious. Nothing, darling, it just seems that there are members of the royal family hiding among us. Remember, kids, if you hear anything about this, you must tell the Marleyan soldiers, since the royal family is evil, Madeline said seriously, making both Lilith and Isabel nod, but Naruto remained curious about the last part. Why are the Fritzes bad, Mom? Naruto asked curiously, making the atmosphere turn cold with that question. They doomed all Eldians by making that deal with the Earth Demon, Madeline said with a frown, making Naruto look at his mother curiously. But Mom, why do we have to pay for that? Naruto asked curiously, making him see hatred in his mother's eyes for the first time. That's simple, because of the cowardice of the 145th King Fritz. Thanks to the Fritzes we are slaves and cannon fodder in wars, but it's a punishment we deserve, said Madeline with a frown and hatred in her voice, making the three brothers look stunned, since for them that punishment was something unfair. Time skip. To the next day. When dawn broke the next day, the children went back to where the warriors were, but this time there were guards at the entrance, which made the three brothers frown, but this did not prevent them from entering since near one of the walls that covered the field there was a small opening through which they entered. Upon entering the field, they realized that not all the warriors were there, only Evelyn and Elaine were present, sleeping comfortably under a tree. Noticing them, Naruto and his sisters went to where they were and realized that both were asleep with their warrior jackets open, revealing that they were wearing black tops that left their abdomens exposed. As he approached, Naruto touched Evelyn's cheek, trying to wake her up. But to his and his sister's surprise, Evelyn reacted to the touch purely on instinct, grabbing Naruto's neck tightly with a hand, causing him to wince in pain. Seeing this, his sisters rushed to his aid. Evelyn, realizing what she had done, released her grip and was surprised by the presence of the three siblings. Elaine simply opened one eye to see what had happened to her sister, who was kneeling beside Naruto, looking worriedly at the marks she had left on the child's neck. You wicked lady, don't hurt my brother, Isabel said with a frown as she pulled Naruto away and hugged him protectively, while Lilith nodded with a frown. Huh, I'm sorry, I only did it on reflex, besides, it was your fault for waking me up like that, Evelyn said, frowning at the two sisters, while Naruto continued rubbing his neck and had small tears in the corner of his eyes. Evelyn, noticing this, felt ashamed for being responsible for hurting the blonde boy. I think you should make it up to him, Evelyn, Elaine said, one eye open, watching the scene with slight interest. Her sister nodded upon hearing this and looked at Naruto, who was still being hugged by Isabel, who wiped the small tears from his eyes. I think you're right, little one. Do you want to see me transform into a titan? Evelyn said with a small smile, making Naruto nod enthusiastically at Evelyn's proposal, and he wasn't the only one since his sisters were too. Upon hearing the little blonde boy's response, Elaine looked at her sister, who stood up and walked away from the area. Elaine stood up in response to her sister's actions and stood in front of the three siblings, which confused the three children. When Evelyn was ready, she looked at the three brothers and her sister and smiled. Watch closely, little one, this is how the power of the Titans is used, Evelyn said with a smile as she took a small knife out of her pocket and quickly cut the palm of his hand. When he did it, everything happened in slow motion for Naruto and his sisters, as the clouds suddenly darkened, causing several lightning bolts to accumulate within them. Evelyn emitted sparks, and then a large bolt of lightning struck her. To the surprise and astonishment of the three siblings, they saw a large skeleton slowly form, with nerve pathways emerging from it. Evelyn positioned herself at the nape of the Titan's neck. When the nerve pathways had completely covered the skeleton, flesh suddenly sprouted from them and covered the Titan's large skeleton. When it was finally completely covered, long, blonde hair sprouted from the Titan's head. Finally, skin began to cover the Titan's flesh, but not completely. The clouds cleared, and a wave of air enveloped the area, causing the three siblings to stare in amazement at the 15-meter Titan. Its hair was roughly the same length as Frieda's. When the three siblings saw this, their eyes were filled with amazement and excited smiles, and without being able to stop himself, Naruto ran towards the Titan. When she noticed him, she ducked down, causing Naruto to almost fall due to the breeze that Evelyn caused when she ducked. When he was close to Evelyn, Naruto noticed that his sisters followed him and, like him, they were surprised. Wow, this is amazing! Naruto exclaimed excitedly as the female Titan smiled, while Elaine had an almost invisible smile as she saw how surprised the triplets were. Hey, I wish I had the same easily surprised mind as a child like you, little blondie. For me, this is so commonplace, said Elaine as she surprised Naruto and picked him up, as well as Lilith, who were both surprised and saw Evelyn face to face in her Titan form. Both, mesmerized, touched Evelyn's cheek, which caused Evelyn, Elaine, Lilith, and Naruto to feel a very strong electric current that made the four of them see a strange image. Flashback. Long ago, the Eldian Empire. In a large open field, a simple throne stood there. On it, a blonde woman was looking at 8 titans that were in front of her. The Colossal Titan, the Female Titan, the Jaw Titan, the Attack Titan, the Warhammer Titan, the Armored Titan, the Quadruped Titan, and the Beast Titan. All of them were bowing to the blonde woman, while she stared at them with an empty gaze. Attack, my titans, said the blonde woman as she raised her hand and sparks began to fly from it, causing all 8 titans to also release sparks. All of this was seen from the perspective of the female titan who, upon sensing the sparks, caused everything to turn dark. End of flashback. When Elaine, Evelyn, Lilith, and Naruto regained consciousness, the 3 of them had a surprised look on their faces, and Evelyn immediately emerged from the back of the titan's neck. What the hell was that? Evelyn said, breathing irregularly as the titan began to evaporate, and Elaine was equally surprised, while both Lilith and Naruto involuntarily shed a tear. Meanwhile, Isabel had a look full of confusion at the expression of everyone in the field. No, I don't know, Elaine said with a stunned look as she quickly lowered Naruto and Lilith, who had blank stares, while Isabel, worried about her siblings, took both of their hands, bringing them back to their senses. Who was that woman? Evelyn nay. Naruto said with a stunned look, and like his sister Lilith, his hands were trembling slightly. Evelyn, who had already gotten off the titan, looked at the children with a frown. She had the marks of a shifter titan around her eyes. These children. If this continues, they won't be able to hide their royal blood, but apparently they don't know they have royal blood, thought Evelyn, looking at the 3 children who were looking at her, searching for an answer to her question. That was the memories of an ancient bearer of my power, and I don't know who that woman is, said Evelyn, sighing, while Elaine looked at the children to see their reaction, who didn't know what to say to this. I think that's enough, it's time to go, Elaine said, making the 3 children look at her and nod, as 2 of them felt a strange fear and the other wanted to get her older siblings out of there. Time skip. 3 days later. Naruto and his sisters had not gone to where the warriors were since they had that vision of the memories of an ancient holder of the female titan. Currently, Naruto was sitting alone in a box, looking at the wall that enclosed the Eldians and separated them from those of Marley. What are you looking at, Naruto? Said Tom Xaver's voice. Naruto, noticing his presence, smiled, as did Tom, but immediately noticed that a teenager was with him. Apparently, he was about 17 years old. The boy was blonde, with slightly tanned skin, and wore the same uniform as the warriors. He looked at Naruto with curiosity in his eyes. Nothing, I was just looking at the sky, said Naruto with a small smile, making Tom nod and look at the sky, while the boy next to him continued to look at Naruto curiously. Oh, I almost forgot, I want to introduce you to my student, his name is Zeke Yeager, I'm training him to pass on my power, Tom said with a smile, making Zeke look at Naruto, who had a surprised look but then looked at Zeke with a smile. Wow, it must be great to be a warrior, said Naruto with a smile, but Zeke, on the other hand, looked at Naruto with a raised eyebrow. No, it's not that big of a deal, although it's an honor to be one, Zeke said with a smile, making Naruto look at Zeke with a sympathetic smile, since he could see in Zeke's eyes that he was under a lot of pressure. You're worried about what will happen after you have the power, aren't you? But, in exchange, Tom will always live on in your memories, right? When I touched Evelyn Nay that time, I could see the memories of a woman. I don't know who she is, but in them I could see how Evelyn Nay spends a lot of time with her. That shows that when a power is passed on to someone else, it doesn't mean the previous person dies and only bequeaths you their power. It means they passed on their experiences, their good times, their bad times, and you know why. So you could learn from them. That means that person is still alive in you, Naruto said, looking at the sky with a small smile, making Tom surprised by the younger blonde's profound words, and Zeke looked at Naruto curiously. Wise words, little one. No doubt when you grow up you will be a great warrior, said Tom with a smile, while Naruto smiled at what he said, showing his teeth. Tom, we have to go, it's almost time for training. See you later, Naruto, Zeke said with a small smile, as he walked past Naruto. He, you two get along well, huh? Anyway, goodbye Naruto, said Tom with a friendly smile, making Naruto nod and smile back. When Naruto was alone again, he looked at the sky, thinking about what had happened 3 days ago with Evelyn and Elaine. He had investigated everything he could about the Titan powers, and had only found that his ancestor, Ymir Fritz, had made a deal with the Earth Demon, just as his mother had told him. That was what had him thinking. If such a deal was true, it would make some sense, since the way to summon the Titan one possesses is through a blood sacrifice, but at the same time, something didn't add up. Don't come back home, said a voice in Naruto's head, making him look around searching for that voice, only to realize that the area where he was completely deserted. That was strange, said Naruto, getting up from where he was and heading home. When Naruto was near his house, he heard a great commotion that seemed to be coming from his house. When he ran closer, he saw a crowd at his house. When he passed through it, he saw with terror how two guards took his two sisters and handcuffed them while they cried, looking at their mother who was there crying with a frown. Mom, what's happening? Why are they taking my sisters away? Naruto said desperately, running towards his sisters, but before he could reach them he was grabbed by a Marleyan guard, causing Naruto to try to break free from his grip. Him too, said one of the guards, who seemed to be the leader. Naruto looked at his mother in surprise at the question, who nodded with a frown and tears in her eyes. Mom, why? What did we do wrong? Naruto said in a broken voice as tears began to fall down his cheeks. Madeline felt disgusted by her son's words and looked at him with disgust. I'm not your mother, demon, Madeline said with disgust as she looked at Naruto, causing him to be surprised as tears fell down his cheeks. Okay, take them away, said the leader of the soldiers, ordering the soldiers to put chains on Naruto's hands, since he didn't have them yet, and chains on his feet, connecting the three brothers to a single chain. As they walked through the streets of their city, they saw how the other inhabitants looked at them with disgust in some cases, while in others they only looked at them with compassion. When they reached the fence that closed the walls, the guards pushed them into a cart, causing them to hurt themselves as they entered. Once inside, Naruto looked at his sisters and checked if either of them had been seriously hurt, but it seemed they only had slight scratches. What happened? Why did Mom hand us over to the Marleyan guards? What did we do wrong? Naruto said desperately, making Lilith frown, while Isabel still had tears in her eyes. I don't know, but Mom suddenly glared at us with hatred when the guards arrived at our house. They said that we possess royal blood, Lilith said with a frown, while Naruto, seeing that Isabel was scared, hugged her, making her cry even harder at what Lilith said. Do we have royal blood? Naruto said in surprise, while Lilith nodded. Suddenly, the cart they were in stopped, making the three siblings nervous. When they opened the door of the cart, some guards roughly grabbed the triplets and made them walk. When the three brothers saw where they were going, they noticed that it was a not very big building which apparently looked like some kind of police station. When they entered, they saw several soldiers who looked at them with disgust, which made the triplets feel bad, but this ended when the guard who was taking them threw them into an empty cell. Elsewhere, a group of people were gathered in a sort of room. One of them was a blond man with a beard of the same color. He wore an elegant black suit with a tie and shoes of the same color. He had green eyes that only detonated seriousness. He was looking at one of the men who was in the room. What do you have planned for the triplets with royal blood, Commander Magath? I think you can't let this opportunity pass you by, can you? Said the elegant blond man in a serious voice, causing the aforementioned to close his eyes, thinking about what he said. Mr. Tiber, although the proposal is extremely tempting, I don't think it's a good idea to train children with royal blood to take the founding titan. Besides, at the moment we don't have any titan powers available, Magath said, carefully considering the situation, while William Tiber looked at him, accepting his answer. I say we get rid of them by turning them into natural titans and sending them to paradise, said one of the high-ranking military officers with a frown, causing Mr. Tiber to look at this man as if he had said the greatest stupidity in humanity. That's stupid, William said with a frown, making the man look at him. The man was about to reply, but another man from the high military command interrupted. Mr. Tiber is right. We should keep at least one of them to activate the coordinate, the man said confidently, making William and Magath nod in agreement. I have another proposal, gentlemen. My men and I have been thoroughly investigating the 9 titanic powers. I believe we are close to being able to replicate the event that gave Ymir Fritz her powers, based on what we have plus what we have investigated about the Ackermans, said a man who wore a military uniform similar to Magath's. He had black hair and a beard, and appeared to be middle-aged. He had dark brown eyes that seemed dull, and pale skin. William looked at him after hearing the proposal. Commander Jackson, are you telling me that if everything goes as you expect, we will have 3 warriors with the power of Ymir Fritz at our disposal? That seems like a risky gamble that could jeopardize our future, William said thoughtfully. Mr. Tiber, I think you're right, but my men and I have been advancing this series of experiments with other subjects, Jackson said earnestly, thus beginning a one-sided conversation. And has there been any progress? William asked doubtfully, making Jackson shake his head. No, but we believe that royal blood is the key, Jackson said confidently, making William nod in agreement with that statement. Well, I think we have nothing to lose by trying. Go ahead, the 3 children with royal blood are in your care. Do whatever is necessary, William said with a serious look towards Jackson, who nodded, while Magath simply observed the conversation in silence, as did the other high-ranking officers. Time skip. 5 months later. Currently we find ourselves in a dark place where not much could be distinguished, but what could be seen was a blonde mane which belonged to Naruto, who was alone locked in a not very large cell which had no comfort. He was locked up like an animal. The blonde boy looked at his hands, which were covered in bandages, as he appeared to be missing some fingers. Naruto stared blankly at this, then suddenly heard his cell open. "Hello little one, it's time for you to eat," said the voice of a woman who was wearing a nurse's uniform. She had dark brown hair and looked young. She had light brown eyes which looked at Naruto with kindness. When Naruto noticed the woman's presence and that she was carrying a tray with bread and a glass of water, he looked at her. Upon seeing him, she felt great pity for Naruto when she saw the state of his hands. "I'm not hungry, Veronica. How are my sisters?" Naruto said without any emotion, causing the nurse named Veronica to sigh and place the tray on the floor. "Your sisters are fine, they haven't been called in for questioning yet. I think they're still completely focused on you, but putting that aside, you need to eat. The tests they're doing on you are brutal. If you don't eat, you won't live long enough to see your sisters again. Also, I brought you some cheese I stole from the kitchen. I hope you like it," Veronica said with a sweet smile on her face, making Naruto look at her with an emotionless expression and simply begin to eat the bread, which had cheese inside. "Why are you doing this? We are demons who have made your people suffer," Naruto said emotionlessly, looking at the brown-haired girl who, upon hearing these words, looked at the blonde boy with a benevolent smile. "Maybe that's true, but to me you're just children who had the misfortune of being born at the wrong time. You're not to blame for what happened in the past. I think if the Titans didn't exist, we could have met under better circumstances, little blondie," Veronica said with a small smile, watching Naruto eat slowly, since his hands weren't very willing to grab the bread and he couldn't hold the glass. Upon seeing this, Veronica smiled and took the glass, bringing it closer to Naruto, who looked at Veronica, but without saying anything, took a sip from the glass and nodded to the brunette, who for a few moments could see an almost invisible smile on Naruto's face. "TCH, brat, it's time. Commander Jackson needs you moving," said a guard who approached the cell, looking at Naruto with a certain disgust. Naruto said nothing. He simply got up from the ground and walked towards the cell door, which was opened by the guard, and Naruto left without resisting the guard. In fact, he followed him closely, while Veronica sadly watched as Naruto walked away as if he were a robot. "Gah!" Naruto shouted through gritted teeth as people dressed in white injected him with something that made the veins in Naruto's arms bulge. "Proceed to the next step," said one of the people in white, causing one of them to get a pair of pliers and without further ado, cut off one of Naruto's fingers, making him scream in pain and a lot of blood come out of it. People did nothing, hoping something would happen, but to everyone's disappointment, nothing seemed to happen. "Diagnosis of substance 616, Commander Jackson said with an emotionless look, causing one of the people in white to pull out a notebook with notes. "Apparently, it has the same problem as with the others, they don't match and aren't accepted by the subject's body. It seems that with this new attempt, we've realized that there's something blocking the substances, making it impossible for them to reach the brain," one of the men said, leaving Jackson thoughtful as he looked at Naruto, who was struggling to stay conscious. Sighing, Jackson signaled for Naruto, who was lying on a stretcher, to be removed. Once he was gone, Jackson picked up the notebook containing all the observations and then felt frustrated because the investigations hadn't progressed at all during the months they had the triplets in custody. At this, he threw the notebook in frustration, causing his staff to be slightly frightened, but to everyone's surprise, they saw Jackson with a giant smile on his face. "That's it," Jackson shouted, leaving all his assistants confused. "What's happening, Commander?" said one of the aides, sounding somewhat nervous. "Give the test subject a sedative and treat his wounds. If the next experiment doesn't work, I'll consider this project a failure," Jackson said, prompting his assistants to take action. "Where is my brother?" Isabel said with tears in her eyes as she was protectively hugged by Lilith, all while they were in a cell while Veronica came to see them. "Your brother is fine, I've already brought him food and I personally made sure he ate it, so you have nothing to worry about," Veronica said with a smile, making the sisters feel somewhat relieved. "Miss Veronica, do you think we can get out of here soon?" Lilith asked worriedly, making the brunette give a nervous smile, since as far as she knew the only way these little ones could get out of here was if the experiment was successful or if they were sent to paradise. "Yes, I think that one day they will be able to leave here and see their brother," said the brunette with a half smile, making the two sisters smile slightly with hope. Time skip to the next day. Naruto was currently sitting on the cold floor of his cell. It was time for his food to be brought, but apparently Veronica hadn't arrived yet. But shortly after that thought crossed his mind, he heard someone approaching. "TCH, demon, get ready. Commander Jackson asked me to take you to the experimentation room," said the soldier with a nasty look on his face, causing Naruto to almost ignore this and leave his cell without putting up any resistance. When he arrived at the room, he was pushed by the guard who put him in a dark room, making Naruto look around confused. Hello little one. We've noticed you've started to get attached to Veronica-san. Well, I guess a demon like you doesn't need friends, said a male voice coming from some old speakers. When that voice finished speaking, the room was suddenly illuminated by a lamp which lit up a scene that made Naruto, for the first time in these 5 months, look surprised. There in front of him, in a wooden chair, was Veronica, gagged, with several cuts and slight signs of torture, as there were several bruises on her face, as well as on her hands and legs. Naruto, at this sight, clenched his teeth tightly as tears threatened to spill from his eyes. He, you little devil, I see you can cry. Well, let's see if we can intensify that emotion by completely blinding your friend, said a man dressed in white who suddenly pulled out an injection which was aimed at Veronica's eye. Upon seeing this, she tried to scream and break free, moving erratically and desperately. Naruto, seeing this, clenched his teeth tightly and ran towards the man in white, who, upon seeing him coming, took a knife from one of the pockets of his robe and tried to attack Naruto with a stab. For Naruto, everything suddenly seemed to move in slow motion, and he felt his limbs moving on their own. Suddenly, he felt an electric current course through his entire body, starting from his brain and extending to the tips of his toes. Just as the man's knife thrust toward him, Naruto swiftly kicked the hand holding the knife, since his hands were now incapacitated. When the man dropped the knife, it hung in the air, and in a swift motion, Naruto delivered another powerful kick, leapt into the air, and kicked the knife handle, sending it flying into the man's head, killing him instantly. When it was all over, Veronica looked in surprise at Naruto, who had a stunned expression since he had killed that man purely out of instinct, and without him being able to stop it, tears began to run down his cheeks. Splendid display of skill, Demon-san, has left me more than satisfied, said the same voice over the loudspeakers. Naruto paid no attention to the comment as he still hadn't processed what had just happened. In another room. Wonderful as I expected, his Ackerman blood has already awakened, Commander Jackson said with a smile on his face, causing his subordinates to nod, but one questioned him. But, Commander, if you look closely, there are no signs that his fingers have begun to regenerate, said one of the subordinate scientists present, making Jackson look at him. There isn't one, since that wasn't the objective of the experiment. The objective you're looking for will be seen next. Proceed with Phase 2, Jackson said with a frown, causing several of his subordinates to nod. With Naruto. Naruto, still standing in front of Veronica, was just staring at the ground, but suddenly several guards entered through the door, making Naruto alert, but this was of no use since one of them gave him a strong blow to the back of the neck, leaving him unconscious. The guards took the blonde man and untied Veronica, leaving her free, which made her look worried about what would happen to the blonde man. Naruto was now unconscious on a stretcher connected to several machines. Commander Jackson approached him with a syringe containing a strange liquid and proceeded to inject it into Naruto. After doing so, he waited a few moments before giving the order to one of his subordinates, who, without even asking, made a cut in the younger blonde boy's abdomen, causing a large wound to open and resulting in bleeding. Give me vital signs now, Jackson said earnestly, prompting his subordinates to action. Sir, your vital signs are slowly declining, what do we do? Said one of the subordinates nervously, making Jackson frown. All we can do is wait for the serum to take effect, all we can do is have faith, Jackson said, frowning. Sir, I think we've lost him. His vital signs are 0, said one of the subordinates, making Jackson frown helplessly. But suddenly, to everyone's surprise in the room, Naruto's hands began to smoke, as did the wound in his abdomen, causing the blood to begin to evaporate. What is this, sir? One of the subordinates said, surprised, as Naruto's wristband slowly fell away, revealing that his fingers were whole again. His vital signs are stable again, the same subordinate said, still surprised. Jackson didn't know what to say, but the manic smile on his face showed that he was happy with the results. With Naruto moments before. Currently, Naruto's body was in that room where the experiments were carried out, but apparently not all of him was there, since another Naruto was in a giant desert, where it seemed that it was always night since the only thing that illuminated the place was the starry sky and a series of strange lights that were there which seemed to be lines of a color that Naruto could not distinguish. I see we've finally met, Naruto Fritz, said a female voice behind Naruto, making him turn around. When he did, he curiously saw a blonde girl of about 10 years old, with hair that reached halfway down her back, leaving bangs on her forehead. On her head she wore a black headband, and she wore a white dress that had patches in some places. The girl was completely barefoot, but what caught Naruto's attention the most were her eyes, which had an ethereal glow with a pattern similar to that of a sun. The girl had a blank expression on her face. That voice. You're the voice that spoke to me 5 months ago, Naruto said seriously, making the blonde nod. Before Naruto could do anything, she touched his abdomen, causing the sand that was at his feet to rise up his legs and reach his abdomen, which began to steam, and his hands as well, causing the same thing to happen. That's right, my name. Well, I've had many names. Some called me goddess, others called me demon, but I suppose you can call me Ymir, Ymir Fritz, your ancestor, Ymir said without any emotion, making Naruto surprised by this. But you're dead. Wait, does that mean I died? Naruto said with a look of anguish, thinking about what would happen to his sisters. Ymir, seeing Naruto's face, immediately shook her head. In a way, you're about to do it. What those guys injected into you was the cranial fluid of 6 titanic powers, which would have 3 endings. In the first, you die because you can't withstand so much. In the second, you would transform into an abnormal titan that would destroy everything, but there's something in you that doesn't want to destroy everything in its path, and that's what stopped it, your will. And finally, the third ending brings us to where we are now, and it's because thanks to those 6 titanic powers, you were somehow guided here, to the paths that lead to the coordinate. This last one was due to your royal blood that connects you directly to me, Ymir said, pointing to the colored lines in the sky, making Naruto surprised, but then he looked at Ymir seriously. So how does the last ending end? Naruto asked, looking at Ymir, who shrugged at the question. That depends on the decision you make, Naruto Fritz, son of Michael Fritz and Kushina Uzumaki. You have 2 options. Die here and let the cycle of karma continue, or accept some of my power and thus end the suffering that plagues all my children, including you, Ymir said seriously, taking out an apple that formed from her hand, causing Naruto to look at it in confusion. With this I can protect my sisters and free the world from the titans, right? Said Naruto, taking the apple that Ymir extended to him, making her nod. Without saying a word, Naruto took a bite of the apple, causing blood to flow from it to his surprise. But instead of stopping Naruto, it seemed to possess him, and out of nowhere, he began to devour the apple as if it were meat. Ymir, seeing this, nodded, then watched as Naruto's body began to emit sparks, and suddenly the sky darkened, but the lines in the sky were still visible, and from each of them, of which there were 9, lightning bolts began to strike, each one hitting Naruto. This power is for you. 2,000 years from now, we have a deal, Naruto Fritz, you will reshape the world, Ymir said as she watched Naruto fall unconscious while everything went dark for the blonde boy. Naruto said while looking at Historia, who had a serious expression, as did everyone else in the room. The blonde boy sighed, knowing what they were thinking. And what does this have to do with what will happen in the future, young man? Said an elderly bald man with slightly tanned skin, a mustache, and a suit identical to everyone else in the room, except his shield was different. Instead of wings, like the legions, it featured roses, implying he was the stationary police commander. Huh, sir, Naruto said, trying to ask the man's name. Commander Pixis, but just call me Pixis, said Commander Pixis with a small smile, making Naruto nod. What will happen in the future will be our extinction or our rise to supremacy, Naruto said with a frown, causing both Pixis and Historia to have a confused look at the latter, and not only them but the others in the room. You mean the rumbling, right? Eren said with an emotionless look, making Naruto nod towards the brown-haired boy. Naruto-san, taking what you said into account, does that mean your 2 sisters also obtained the same powers as you? Hanjay said curiously, making Naruto look at her. No, one of them wasn't strong enough. And died. I didn't know this until 3 years after the experiment, and in fact, I didn't know that Lilith was my sister until recently, Naruto said with a frown, causing many to look curiously at that comment. That means Lilith was the one who survived, but that also means that, like you, she lost her memory, right? Historia said with a thoughtful look, making the blonde nod, then looked at Eren. To think that ruthless bitch is my sister. TCH Lilith Fritz is a captain of a special force in the Marleyan army who made her way through the corpses of generals from other nations, becoming a warrior to be feared, said Naruto, instinctively touching the marks on his cheeks, causing several to notice the scars on his face. I think we can help you, but what do you need? Historia said with a frown, surprising the members of the Legion as well as many soldiers, but it seemed that the only ones who remained calm were those next to Historia, Hange and Levi, who had a serious look on his face. For now, I want us to form an alliance and let me stay here for a few months. It would be strange if I returned so soon without anything. And lastly, I want Annie Leonhardt, since I can't return empty-handed. In exchange, I'll give you all the secrets I know about the Titans, train those 2 Titan shifters, and help you with whatever you need. What do you say? Do we have an alliance? Naruto said, approaching Historia's table and extending his hand. Historia looked thoughtful and glanced at the others at the table, who nodded. Historia shook his hand, and everyone watched in amazement as sparks flew from both of their hands. Naruto didn't seem impressed by this. Instead, he smiled. Well, I believe this meeting is adjourned. As we have agreed, the truth of the world will spread throughout all 3 walls, to restore humanity's memories. I declare that the war criminal, Naruto Uzumaki, will be under the jurisdiction of the Survey Corps, Historia said, causing all the officers to nod and begin to leave, leaving only the Survey Corps, Naruto, and Historia, who sighed when everyone else had left. Tired, Your Majesty, said Naruto with a mocking smile, making Historia look at him with a smile, which made him smile too. Just a little, Naruto-san. I didn't think being queen would be so tiring, Historia said with a small smile, making Naruto nod and look at the Legion seriously. What's next? What do they need from me? I'll help in any way I can during these months, Naruto said, looking at Hanji, since for Naruto she was the leader. For now, we can't let you roam freely within the walls. It's true that the general public doesn't know you're a war criminal, but the military branches do. After all, you murdered many of our soldiers, Hange said seriously, making Naruto snort and point at Levi. The only ones I hurt here were the dwarf, Mikasa, and the brown-haired boy over there, said Naruto, pointing to Jin, who had a bandaged arm. Levi frowned at how Naruto called him. The others who were killed were from the military police. As for your other comrades, they were killed by Zeke. I'm truly sorry, said Naruto, bowing his head, which made some in the Legion seem surprised by the blonde's sincerity. Well, we should say the same about it since we killed Bertolt, Armin said with a somewhat sad look, making Naruto look at him sympathetically since he somehow knew how it felt. It doesn't matter. We'll start this war and in every war there are casualties, Naruto said, giving Armin a reassuring smile that made him smile back. Anyway, I think we should give you a secluded place to live, Hange said, giving Historia an idea. What about the farm located in Wall Rose? Historia said seriously, making Naruto look at her doubtfully, while Hange seemed to be thinking about it. Actually, it's not bad. It's in the middle of the countryside and it's also a bit far from the last wall, so we can keep an eye on it, Hange said thoughtfully, making Naruto look at her with a poker face. Hey, I can hear you, you know. Naruto said with a poker face, making Historia smile, which Naruto noticed and made him raise an eyebrow. Anyway, Aren, Armin, and Mikasa can guide you with Historia to where you'll be living these next few months, Hange said, pointing to the trio. Historia nodded in response, and they looked at Naruto. I guess so, said Naruto, unsure what to say, glancing at the group for a moment, causing them to look at him curiously. Sorry, thanks for listening, said Naruto with a small smile, eliciting a similar smile from some in the room. Flashback. Currently, Naruto was in his cell. A few months had passed since he had made the deal with Ymir, but other than that, he couldn't remember anything beyond that. It's time for your training session. This time we have a new partner who is eager to meet you, said a scientist approaching the cell, making the blonde man alert, but then he relaxed and headed towards the cell exit as the scientist guided him to a room. She was completely alone, but from what he could see there were several bloodstains on the walls, which led him to notice a girl he had never seen before. She had black hair. One of her eyes was covered by her hair, but from what he could tell it was red. The girl had pale skin and wore a white dress with long sleeves and a skirt of the same color. She was barefoot. Naruto wore the same outfit, the only difference being that Naruto wore pants instead of a skirt and his outfit was not stained with blood like the girl's. You will be my new toy, said the girl with a playful smile on her face, sending a shiver down Naruto's spine. My name is Naruto. What's yours? Said Naruto, trying to be friendly with the girl who looked at him with childlike curiosity. The men in white still call me Lilith Fritz, I think that's my name, Lilith said with a somewhat unsettling smile as she looked at Naruto, which did not disturb the blonde boy, who simply maintained an emotionless expression. Enough talk, training starts now. Today we have a special guest, Commander Magath, which means that whoever wins will have their freedom guaranteed, said a male voice over the loudspeakers, making Lilith look at Naruto with a smile. We'll have so much fun, Naru-tilda, Lilith said playfully, moving with surprising speed. She threw a kick aimed at Naruto's head, but he blocked it with his arm and countered with a headbutt that sent Lilith flying back a little. Then, unexpectedly, Naruto kicked her in the abdomen, sending her crashing into a wall. Naruto stared at her with a serious expression, but his gaze turned to curiosity when he heard laughter coming from Lilith. You're fun, Naru-tilda, you're not like the others so I don't have to hold back, right? Said Lilith, making her fingers harden and her nails lengthen. Taking a running start, Lilith charged towards Naruto, who watched this seriously and hardened his arms, blocking Lilith's incredibly fast attacks. Tired of defending himself, Naruto hardened his fingers, as did Lilith, along with their knuckles. Taking a fighting stance, Naruto looked at Lilith, who had stepped back slightly, and without further ado, he charged at her, throwing a punch with his right fist. She dodged it and delivered a powerful blow to Naruto's chin, sending him slightly flying. This caused Naruto to harden his toes and kick her in the chin, slashing her throat. This made Lilith stumble backward, but to Naruto's surprise, she began to emit steam. Until now, Naruto had never seen anyone with powers like hers. You're just like me, Naruto whispered, which distracted him a little as Lilith, taking advantage of his distraction, ran towards him, punching him in the abdomen, almost knocking him unconscious. But it didn't end there, as Lilith, with a sinister smile, hardened her fingers even more and made a blade emerge from them, cutting Naruto's arm, which made Naruto back away. Wow, I think you're just like me, Tilda. This is going to be really fun, Lilith said with a playful smile on her face as she looked at Naruto, who had a serious look on his face as he watched his arm smoke and begin to regenerate little by little. Unable to stop it, Naruto watched as Lilith approached him with superhuman speed and swept aside his feet, causing him to fall. He tried to avoid it with his remaining hand, but it didn't work, as Lilith acted quickly and kicked him in the stomach from the ground, knocking him to the ground. Seeing her advantage, Lilith straddled Naruto and smiled maniacally at him. You know, Naru, you lasted longer than my breathing test dummies. You deserve a prize, Lilith said with a smile as she began to strike Naruto's face with her hardened knuckles, causing him to scream in pain and spit blood repeatedly, his nose also bleeding. Naru, you don't look happy. You know you should always smile like a fox. Let me help you do it, Lilith said with a maniacal grin as she dug a hardened fingernail into Naruto's cheeks, leaving 3 lines on each side that began to spurt blood. That way you'll always be happy, Naru, Lilith said with a playful smile as she simply observed her younger brother's almost unconscious expression, not that she knew. End of flashback. Location: north of the Rose Wall. Wow, has it been so long since that? Said Naruto, touching one of the scars on his cheeks, as he sat on a wooden fence, gazing at the star-filled night sky. What's wrong, Naruto-san? Historia asked, dressed in a white shirt, a beige skirt, and with her hair down. Naruto was dressed the same as at the meeting, except without his trench coat. He was slightly surprised that she hadn't noticed him. Nothing, I was just thinking about the past. To be honest, I still find it hard to believe that Lilith is my sister, and to think that I realized it through the coordinates, Naruto said with a thoughtful look as he gazed at the sky. I think I know how it feels. After all, I didn't know I had a sister who always took care of me. Well, in your case it seems to be the opposite, Historia said, looking at the sky, just like Naruto. Am I that easy to read? Well, anyway, I hope things turn out well, Naruto said with a sigh, making Historia smile at him. I don't know for sure, but I hope so. Naruto-san, thank you for taking care of Ymir. In her letter, she said that you didn't let anything happen to her while you were together, Historia said with a sweet smile towards Naruto, who simply smiled back. Hey, you don't have to thank me, it was my mission, but seeing these lands, you know, I think I would have liked to have been born inside the walls. I know it would have its ups and downs, but honestly, I would have liked it, said Naruto with a small smile, looking at the sky. Historia, upon hearing his comment, looked at Naruto with curiosity, and seeing Naruto's smile, she smiled too, which made Naruto look at her with curiosity. Why are you smiling so much, Historia? Naruto asked curiously, making Historia look at him with a smile. I don't know, Naruto-san, I can't help it whenever you smile, hee, Historia said, letting out a laugh which she covered with her hand, making Naruto look at her strangely. Time skip. 2 months. After History's official coronation and Hange's official appointment as commander of the Legion, things moved quickly as Naruto was subjected to experiments by Hange, training in hand-to-hand combat with Eren and Armin. In fact, Naruto was currently in an open field looking at Eren, who hadn't changed in 2 months, well, only his hair had grown a little. Currently, he was dressed only in black pants and barefoot, just like Naruto, who had the same appearance, only his sideburns were somewhat long. Without saying a word, Naruto lunged at Eren with his knuckles hardened, causing Eren to dodge a right hook aimed at his cheek. Eren, like the blonde, hardened his knuckles and tried to punch Naruto in the chin, but Naruto dodged and headbutted Eren hard in the forehead, sending him back a few steps and causing him to bleed slightly. Not wanting to be left with nothing, Eren ran towards Naruto and tried to sweep him, but Naruto jumped back and then tried to kick him, which made Eren smile slightly and block Naruto's kick and punch Naruto in the abdomen, which made him back away. You've improved, Eren. Let's take this to the next level, Naruto said with a small smile, causing Eren to nod seriously and his body to begin emitting sparks. In response, Naruto hardened his finger and cut the palm of his hand, causing his body to also begin emitting sparks. Suddenly, both were struck by lightning, causing them to transform into 15-meter titans. Eren transformed into the attack titan, while Naruto transformed into a titan whose body was completely covered in skin with hardened plates on his arms, legs, and abdomen. His face was a kind of hardened mask covering his jaw, similar to the armored titan, but with skin under the plates and without the armor around his eyes. His eyes were sky blue, and he had blonde hair falling over his face and back. When the transformation ended, both were in fighting stances. For some reason, neither attacked, which prompted Naruto to charge at Eren. He punched Eren, who dodged and was ready to apply a hold, but suddenly, hardened spines erupted from all over Naruto's body, stabbing Eren repeatedly and immobilizing him. Naruto moved and delivered a powerful blow to Eren's face, sending him flying. But before he could land, a large pillar of hardened material pierced his stomach. Seeing the source of the attack, Eren saw Naruto's Titan form, which held a hammer on its shoulder, supported by its right hand. With its left hand, Eren watched in astonishment as an axe made of hardened crystal suddenly appeared. Gathering momentum, Naruto's arm began to emit steam, and he hurled the axe with force, aiming directly for Eren's head. Eren lost his composure. Head. But this did not make Naruto lower his guard, as suddenly a lightning bolt struck a few meters from him in the sky, where the attacking Titan appeared again, having escaped by abandoning his body and dodging the axe. Naruto was about to attack him in the air, but suddenly he felt something on the back of his neck and out of nowhere his head flew to pieces courtesy of Mikasa, who was looking at Naruto's Titan with a murderous look. Time. That was cheating, said Naruto, emerging from some bushes with strips of meat around his eyes, implying that this was how he controlled the Titan. At this, Eren, who had already fallen to the ground, emerged from the back of his Titan's neck and looked at Naruto, confused, as did Mikasa. Naruto-san, how were you able to control the Titan without being on its neck? Is that even possible? Said Hange, who was riding a horse along with Armin and the rest of the Legion, or rather, those who were left. That was the point of today's lesson, but Mikasa interfered once Eren was losing, Naruto said, frowning. Mikasa didn't even flinch and completely ignored him, which only infuriated him further. Anyway, I wanted Eren to learn how to deal with the second strongest Titan, the Warhammer Titan, Naruto said, pointing to his headless Titan body, which was beginning to evaporate. Is this what the Hammer Titan looks like? Armin asked curiously, making Naruto shake his head and sigh. No, that Titan is the representation of my Titan power. What you saw there was the combination of the 9 Titan powers, or well, those I assimilated, said Naruto, making Hange look at the body that was there with pure wonder. Naruto, on the other hand, walked over to where Mikasa was and looked at her with a frown. She, who was near Eren, noticed that Naruto was coming towards her with a frown, which made her look at him. Mikasa, aren't you going to give an explanation about why you got involved in the fight? Naruto said, looking Mikasa in the eyes, while Mikasa had no emotion in them. I thought Eren was in danger. I was just protecting him, Mikasa said, unfazed by the vein threatening to burst on Naruto's head. Danger. Don't you see that's the point of training, to act with a cool head in the face of mortal danger? You're not always going to be there with him to defend him, even if you're his girlfriend or whatever, said Naruto with an annoyed look, while Mikasa this time looked at Naruto with a slight blush at the last thing, but then frowned. But you were able to create another Titan and keep fighting, right? Mikasa said with a cold stare, making Naruto blush with embarrassment, while Connie and Sasha, who were there, smiled mockingly. Ho 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 tilde, it seems Naruto has you, Sasha said mockingly, while Connie also smiled mockingly. Shut up, potato girl, and you too, Baldy, Mikasa, that's not the point, Naruto said with a frown, looking at Mikasa, who completely ignored him, which made Naruto sigh. Forgive her, Naruto-san, she's always been like this since she was little, especially with Eren, Armin said with an embarrassed smile. Naruto smiled nostalgically at his words. Don't worry, her personality brings back memories, Naruto said with a sigh as Hange threw him a bag, which he caught with his belongings. He grabbed his shirt, put it on, and then took out some boots, which he also put on. When he was ready, he took his bag, whistled, called a horse, and mounted it. Naruto-san, it seems we're finished for today. You can go now. Tomorrow, could you accompany me? I want you to explain more about the remote control of the Titans. Hange said with a serious look, making the older blonde nod. Hange-san, regarding Annie, could we release her when the snow starts to fall? Naruto said seriously, which made Hange hesitate a little, but she nodded. Taking the answer, Naruto left there riding that horse at speed, leaving the Legion staring in the direction he was going. Hange, aren't you giving the war criminal too much freedom? Levi said with a cold look. He was already there with Jean, but they hadn't said anything. I don't know, but we've made enormous progress these past 2 months thanks to your help. Besides, you don't seem to have bad intentions if you were to take the first opportunity to kidnap Eren and hand him over to your nation, Hange said, looking at Levi, who didn't respond to her question and instead urged his horse, which he was riding, to move. Eren, you've seen your father's memories, haven't you? Tell me, what was Naruto-san like in them? Armin said curiously, making Eren look at him and give a small smile. My father never met him, but his father was Michael Fritz, an Eldian who protected his people with his last breath. If Naruto-san is the same, then he's not lying, Eren said with a smile, which made the Legion look at him, some with doubt and others trusting his word. TCH, I hope so, Levi said coldly, starting to leave the place with the Legion members behind him. With Naruto. Naruto was on his way north of Wall Rose where the farm where he lived was located. On the way there, he saw the farm in the distance and had a small smile. When he arrived, he noticed that everything was quiet, which did not surprise him. He put the horse in the corral and walked through the fenced field of the area. Sitting down on one of the wooden fences of the field, Naruto smiled at the tranquility he felt. I'm glad to see you happy, Naruto, Ymir's voice said with a touch of sweetness, making Naruto smile when he heard her voice. Oh, are you happy for me? You've changed a lot, Ymir. Before, you didn't even show any emotion, hehe. Is it because of you? Naruto thought with a smile, while Ymir in Naruto's mind didn't say anything. Naruto simply heard a melodious laugh that made him smile, knowing that Ymir was smiling. Naruto, what are you doing? Historia said, suddenly appearing next to Naruto, causing the blonde boy to fall face first off the fence, startled by her sudden appearance. Damn it, Historia, how many times do I have to tell you not to appear like this? You're going to give me a heart attack, said Naruto, getting up and looking at Historia, who smiled at his reaction. Currently, Historia was wearing a simple white dress with sleeves and had her hair loose, like the one seen in the Return to Shiganshina arc when they were about to take down the Colossal. He, you're a scaredy cat, Naruto, Historia said with a hint of mockery, making the blonde boy glare at her. And you're a dwarf, Naruto said mockingly, making Historia pout at what he said. Take it back, cat face, Historia said, pointing at Naruto's marks, which caused him to stare blankly and a dark aura to begin surrounding him. Historia felt a chill run through her body at this. What did you say, you little dwarf with a queen complex? Naruto said with a dark aura, which Historia swallowed hard, and Naruto acted by jumping to catch her, but she dodged him and started running trying to escape from Naruto, but after a few minutes Naruto caught her, making them both fall to the ground rolling on the floor, making them both laugh at what happened. When they stopped rolling, they both stared at the sky, which had darkened without them knowing. Naruto smiled at the sight of the starry sky. Historia looked at the sky as well as Naruto, and then looked at him, which made her smile. When Naruto noticed, he looked at her with doubt. Shorty, have you been to the doctor yet? That constant laughing must be an illness, said Naruto, raising an eyebrow, which made Historia let out a soft laugh, something that unknowingly made Naruto feel good. Naruto, I think I like you, Historia said bluntly, which made Naruto tense up when he heard what came out of her mouth, but then he looked at the sky and replied. People don't usually say that so directly, you know. Besides, I thought you liked girls, you know, like Ymir, Naruto said curiously, making Historia playfully punch him in the arm. I'm not like other people, besides, I don't know how that works, but I assure you that I like you, Historia said with a smile, looking at the starry sky. Naruto, not knowing what to answer, sat down and looked at her. To be honest, I like you too, Shorty, Naruto said with a smile, which made Historia suddenly throw herself at him and kiss him on the lips, surprising Naruto, but then he returned the kiss. When they finished, they both separated and looked at each other without saying anything. Naruto suddenly gave her a protective hug, which surprised Historia, but then she smiled and returned the hug. Time skip. 1.5 months later. After a long time, the snow finally began to fall inside the walls, making the activity of the Titans outside them scarce. Inside the walls, more specifically beneath them in one of the underground facilities, Naruto was with Hange and a large part of the military police who were guarding the area. Naruto was looking at the glass where Annie was locked up with a frown, while Hange was simply there to watch over Naruto. Without saying anything, Naruto touched Annie's crystal and closed his eyes, causing an electric current to run from his hand to the crystal through his hand. Annie-chan, are you there? It's time you woke up, said Naruto, forcing a connection with Annie, who for a while didn't seem to answer, but suddenly, after a few long minutes, she spoke. Naruto, is that you? What are you doing here? They managed to rescue me, are we in Marley? Annie said desperately, making Naruto smile slightly and answer. No, Annie-chan, we're in paradise, but I'll explain later. First, get out of the crystal, Naruto said through the connection. Okay Naruto, but I've put myself in a coma, I'll need help, Annie said seriously, making Naruto give her a nod of approval. Having said that, Naruto caused more lightning to pass through the crystal, completely covering it, and it began to crack, surprising Hange as well as the guards behind her. Suddenly, a light blinded everyone in the room, and when everything returned to normal, the crystal was completely broken and Annie was completely free. But as soon as she was free, she fell forward, feeling her legs give way, but before she could fall, she was caught by Naruto. I've got you, Annie-chan, Naruto said with a smile, helping Annie to her feet. Annie smiled at Naruto's presence, but then looked around and frowned when she noticed Hange and the guards. Hello Annie Leonhardt, Hange said with a friendly smile, which was not reciprocated by the blonde, who looked at her coldly. Captain Hange Zoe, Annie said coldly to the new commander of the Legion. Naruto, knowing this was going to happen, gave Annie a signal. Hange-san, could you leave us alone? Annie and I need to talk, Naruto said seriously, causing Hange and the guards to leave the room where they were. After everyone left, Annie pushed Naruto and looked at him with a frown, making him seem unsurprised by her action. What does this mean? Are you on the side of the demons now? Annie said with a frown and a cold look, making Naruto frown as well. You more than anyone else have realized that you're wrong. They're just like us, Naruto said with a frown, making Annie avoid his gaze, knowing he was right, but she replied anyway. Anyway, what about the High Command? They'll kill us if they find out we're on Eldia's side. Besides, the Legion will demand my head in front of all the people I've killed, Annie said with some concern, feeling very bad about what she had just said. Marley doesn't matter. Commander Zeke is with me. As for the Survey Corps, well, a lot has happened. Annie, it's been almost 4 months since you were trapped in the crystal. When we arrived, Commander Zeke fought the Survey Corps, but we were defeated. Levi defeated the commander, Eren and Armin defeated Bertolt, and Mikasa and the others defeated Reiner. I couldn't arrive in time, but that was part of the plan. Bertolt was devoured by Armin, but in return, we destroyed 98% of a military branch, Naruto said, sitting on the floor against the wall, unable to believe what he was saying. Annie was shocked by what Naruto said, and her legs gave way, causing her to fall as treacherous tears streamed down her cheeks. Wow, things have changed, huh? Annie said in a broken voice, making Naruto nod with an understanding look. Yes, that's right, many things happened, but now I'm on the side that will save our brothers. Marley isn't interested in us. We're just tools that can be replaced. Here, on the other hand, we're helping a cause that will benefit us all, Naruto said with a smile as he looked at Annie, who didn't know whether to believe him or not. How do you know? How do you know if this is truly the path that will save us? Annie said desperately to Naruto, who smiled at her. Eren Yeager possesses the coordinate and I managed to assimilate it, which gives me a chance to activate my plan only if everything gets out of hand, said Naruto with a smile, approaching Annie who looked surprised by the revelations. Your plan. Anyway, I'm sure they want my head, Annie said, looking at the ground regretfully. Naruto didn't say anything to her and hugged her, making Annie cry openly. Don't worry, Annie-chan, I've already fixed everything. They won't touch a hair on your head while I'm here, Naruto said, comforting her. She buried her face in his chest, and they stayed like that for a few minutes. Then they both stood up, and Naruto wiped Annie's tears. She smiled at this. I think you should take off that military jacket, Naruto said, pointing to the military police jacket. Annie nodded. Location. Military Council Chamber of the Walls. After getting Annie out of where Naruto was, Hange forced him to present himself to the military council with Annie, giving the current situation a Naruto who stared seriously at the queen with Annie at his side who did not have the strength to look the others in the face. Naruto-san, how did you manage to get Miss Annie out of her prison? Commander Pixis asked curiously. Naruto answered kindly. Of course, Mr. Pixis, I possess a power which allows me to communicate with anyone with Eldian blood in their veins, although this is only at a certain distance, Naruto said seriously, causing Commander Pixis to nod in response. Anyway, Naruto, you have cooperated with us these past 3.5 months. You have fulfilled your part of the deal. Taking this into account, Annie Leonhardt will be released from her charges and placed at your disposal, said an older man with long hair and a beard, who wore glasses and a military uniform like the others. Thank you, General Zackley. It has been a pleasure staying with you these past few months. I was able to learn more from you than you learned from me, said Naruto, bowing to the table where Historia was sitting. Annie listened in surprise as Naruto managed to get her released. Huh, what did you learn from us, Naruto? I hope nothing bad, said Commander Pixis mockingly, making Naruto smile. No, not at all, only good things, Naruto said with a smile, making the commander smile too. Annie Leonhardt, do you have anything to say about all this? Historia said with a serious expression, causing Annie to look up and stare at her, revealing the tears in her eyes to everyone. Thank you. We were just kids who didn't know anything. Thank you for forgiving me, Annie said with tears in her eyes, looking at everyone in the room, causing Armin, Historia, Eren, and the rest of the 104th Training Corps to have a soft smile on their faces. Naruto, seeing this, touched Annie's head, causing her to hug him tightly to prevent the others from seeing her tears. Location. North of the Rose Wall. After facing the military council, Naruto took Annie to the place where he was currently staying. When they arrived, Annie stayed with Naruto in the field looking at the scenery since it had already gotten dark. You're cheating, aren't you? Annie said, staring into space, avoiding Naruto's gaze, who tensed up a little. It's necessary. I simply helped them take the first step, Naruto said, looking up at the sky, leaving Annie speechless at his response. What will you do when they realize? Annie said, glancing sideways at Naruto, who didn't answer, he simply sighed. I hope they never do it, Naruto said, looking up at the sky, making Annie nod. When are we leaving here? Annie said, changing the subject, noticing that Naruto looked somewhat uncomfortable. When the snow disappears, it seems the Legion plans to escort us out of the wall, said Naruto, standing up and stretching his arms. Have you thought about what you'll do when we get to Marley? Annie said, giving Naruto a cold look, which made him look at her curiously. Don't look at me like that. Speaking of which, I want you to do me a favor, Naruto said seriously, looking at Annie, who looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Sure, what do you need? Annie said curiously, making Naruto look at her seriously. I want you to join Marley's special squad and keep an eye on Lilith Fritz, Naruto said with a frown, making Annie look at him as if he were crazy. Are you serious? You want me to join that crazy woman's bloodthirsty squad? Annie said as if it were a joke by the blonde man, but he didn't change his expression. Annie, I'm asking you this not as your superior, I'm asking you as your best friend. I need to keep an eye on Lilith Fritz and I can't trust anyone but you to do it, Naruto said with a smile, making Annie sigh and nod. Okay, but why the sudden interest in Lilith? I thought she only saw you as a pet or something worse, Annie said curiously. Naruto sighed at her words. That may be so, but a lot has happened. I recently found out that the Lilith I try so hard to avoid is my older sister, said Naruto, who expected some expression of surprise from Annie, but she had a look that said she had already expected something like that. I'm sorry for not being surprised, but it was somewhat likely since they both have royal blood and possess the same powers, Annie said as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I guess you're right, but it still took me by surprise, Naruto said with a tired sigh. Annie didn't say anything about his actions. Naruto, you haven't told me what your plan is. Annie said curiously, since she hadn't heard anything about it. Well, my plan is only in case things get completely out of control. Let's say if Commander Zeke's plan fails and Eren's plan also fails or gets out of control, Naruto said simply, making Annie look at him with more curiosity. The commander's plan. Eren's. Annie said curiously, making Naruto look at her. The commander's plan is to euthanize all Eldians with the power of the founding titan, while Eren's plan is still unclear, but I've already planted the seed with the rumbling, Naruto said seriously, making Annie nod in understanding. I see things look complicated, but you still haven't told me your plan. Is it even more drastic than the others? Annie said curiously, making Naruto look at her as if he were agreeing with her. Well, my plan involves changing the world completely, reforming it, so to speak, said Naruto, gazing at the horizon, while Annie still wasn't clear on how the blonde boy planned to do it. Time skip. A few days later. Currently, the recruits of Troop 104 were riding on horseback to an unknown direction, all under the cold falling snow. They were all wearing winter clothing. Are you sure it's necessary to go immediately? Armin asked curiously, looking at Eren, who was riding a horse just like Armin. I have to ask him personally. Besides, you want to know too, don't you? Eren said seriously, making Armin nod, knowing he was right. But what if Naruto doesn't let us? Mikasa said this time from her horse, making Eren think about it for a bit. Naruto-san is a good person, I think he'll let us talk to her, Sasha said this time with a small smile while looking ahead. I don't entirely agree, but I think Sasha is right, Connie said with a hint of misgiving in her voice, while Jean sighed. Because of him I broke my arm, but I suppose it was in self-defense, said Jean with a certain air of maturity, making the others look at him, then smile, and some burst out laughing, much to Jean's annoyance. After a long ride, they arrived at the farm where Naruto lived. Leaving their horses in the stable, Eren knocked on the door, followed by the rest of his companions. Soon they all heard footsteps approaching the door, and when they arrived, Naruto opened it. He was dressed in a simple white long-sleeved shirt, black pants, and simple shoes. Hello, how are you? Come in, said Naruto, somewhat surprised by their arrival, but inviting them in anyway. Once inside, everyone was enveloped by the warm scent of the environment, involuntarily making them feel relaxed. Upon entering, they sat at a wooden table with Naruto and Eren at the head, leaving some chairs empty. And he brings them to my house, said Naruto with a friendly smile on his face, which made Eren suddenly frown. We want to talk to Annie, Eren said seriously, making Naruto look at him for a few moments in the same way, then he sighed, knowing that this was going to happen. Without saying anything, Naruto got up and walked out of the room. After a few moments, the group watched curiously as not one but two blondes entered the room, which left them confused. Hey Historia, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Sina, Armin said curiously, as did the others in the room. Historia, who was being watched with surprise by the members of the 104th Training Unit, smiled sheepishly. Well, I come here to spend time with Naruto from time to time, Historia said with a small smile, making Armin nod and accept the answer, but Sasha, Connie, and Jean had stunned looks. Are you two a couple? Sasha said, pointing dramatically at both of them, which made Historia look at Naruto with an embarrassed smile and a slight blush on her cheeks, while Naruto smiled and nodded without further ado. Congratulations, I don't mean to be rude, but we're here for Annie, Eren said seriously, prompting Annie to step forward and sit next to Naruto and Historia. What's wrong with me? Annie said with a cold look towards the others, but then she felt Naruto's gaze on her, making her look normally at the others. I want you to tell me yourself, are you still on Rainer's side? Eren said with a frown, making Annie sigh and look at the others. I was never really on one side, I was simply fulfilling my mission. As a child, I wanted my father to be proud of me and for both of us to be able to hold our heads high in front of the people of Marley who only saw us as trash. But I knew he was afraid that one day I wouldn't return, since he didn't want to lose me like he lost my mother, who died under strange circumstances, Annie said, looking away. Eren nodded in agreement with her answer, but Armin decided to clear up his doubt as well. Annie, I think Naruto-san told you, right? I devoured Bertolt. You have nothing to say about it, Armin said with a certain nervousness in his voice, expecting a cold response from Annie. No, I have nothing to say, Annie said simply, surprising several people there except for Eren, Mikasa, Historia, and Naruto. But you don't have a shred of hatred towards me, Armin said with surprise in his voice, but Annie shook her head at Armin. Why should I? Annie said as if what Armin did was the most normal thing in the world. Don't you feel any pain for your friend? He cared for you a lot, didn't you care? Armin said, raising his voice, which surprised Connie, Sasha, and Jean. You're misunderstanding me. Someone once told me that, when a power is passed on to another, it doesn't mean the previous person dies and only bequeaths you their power. It means they passed on their experiences, their good times, their bad times, and you know why. So you could learn from them. That means that person is still alive in you. Therefore, Bertolt lives on in you, Annie said with a small, genuine smile that made Naruto and Historia smile as well. Armin remained silent at her words, contemplating the table as if he were thinking beyond what he believed possible, while Eren processed Annie's words as if he had found a hidden meaning behind them. Armin, I once asked you if you considered me a good person, tell me your answer now, Annie said with an emotionless look towards the blonde boy who looked at her. I still believe that all people, who consider themselves as such, have something good in them. Annie, I still believe you are a good person, Armin said with a small smile towards Annie, who returned it. The rest of the afternoon the troop spent at Naruto's house taking refuge from the snow that was falling continuously. Time skip. 1 month later. When the snow stopped falling and spring returned to the walls, the defense weapon that destroyed Titans on Wall Maria stopped moving, since the Titans of Wall Maria had been completely exterminated, causing humanity inside the walls to recover their territory, but this caused the Legion and several military bodies to help with the reconstruction along with Naruto and Annie, the latter did so covertly. Which brings us to the present where Naruto and Annie, along with the Legion, were riding outside the walls, heading towards the last wall that covered the island. Along the way, the Legion encountered several pure Titans who were unable to move, but after much effort they reached the last wall. Passing through, the Legion gazed in amazement at the crystal clear sea, causing Armin to become excited, as did the others in the Legion, except for Levi, who refused to enter the water. Naruto, how will you get back to Marley? Mikasa asked curiously, making Naruto look at her. It will take me days, I think even weeks, but I will do it through the power of the Titan, said Naruto, stretching his arms and legs. Hey Naruto, how did your story take your departure? Don't tell me you left her crying at home, Sasha said mockingly, making Naruto give her a poker face. Flashback. Naruto was currently stroking Historia's head, who had tears in the corner of her eyes while she pouted. Naruto smiled sheepishly at how cute the little blonde looked. There, you don't have to cry, Historia. I told you I'd be back in a year, you'll see how time flies, Naruto said with a smile, but instead of calming Historia down, it made her cling to him even more. But what if you don't come back, just like Ymir? Historia said in a broken voice, clinging to Naruto, which made him smile softly and made her look at him. Well, I promise you, and you know I never break my promises. Naruto said with a smile as he pressed his forehead to hers, making her smile at his words. But what about the clothes you have here? Aren't you going to take them? Historia asked curiously as she wiped her tears and looked at Naruto, who shrugged. I can't take clothes from here to Marley, it would be suspicious, so I'll leave them here, Naruto said with a smile, making Historia smile happily, which made Naruto look at her confused. Does that mean I can use it when I feel lonely? Historia said with a smile, making Naruto nod, but then she made Naruto look at Historia in confusion. Wait, what does that mean, huh? Naruto said, confused, but he was ignored by Historia who ran out of the room. End of flashback. I suppose I'm hurt, but I'll return in a year with reinforcements, Naruto said seriously at the end, making the Legion members nod. Naruto, we will truly be free if we finish off the enemy beyond the sea, Eren said with pain in his eyes, which made Armin and Mikasa, who heard him, look at him worriedly, while Annie, who was there, looked at Eren, seeing that he had changed a lot since the whole invasion happened. To be honest, I think we'll be free someday, but it will take more than just destroying the enemy, Naruto said with a sigh, then looked at the rest of the Legion and smiled. I guess this is goodbye for now, Naruto said with a smile on his face, and cut with one of his fingers. Naruto moved away from the Legion and Annie. When he was far enough away, a beam struck him, transforming him into the armored titan. He carefully approached the Legion and Annie and lowered his arm, causing Annie to climb onto it. Naruto suddenly opened his mouth, putting Annie inside, surprising the Legionnaires. Without saying anything, Naruto nodded towards the Legionnaires and looked at Eren before entering the sea and walking towards the horizon. After walking for days on his titan, Naruto found himself sitting on his titan's tongue with Annie by his side. Naruto had strips of flesh around his eyes that connected him to his titan. He was currently looking straight ahead. Still nothing around, Annie said bored, making Naruto blink and look at her. No, it seemed strange to me that something might have happened, Naruto said with a frown, making Annie shrug. After a while of silence, Naruto suddenly widened his eyes and smiled because in the distance he could see a warship, but he couldn't see who it belonged to because he couldn't distinguish its flag. Annie, get ready, we're going to Marley, Naruto said with a frown on his face, making Annie smile slightly, unlike Naruto, since she would see her father again. After finding the ship, Naruto and Annie were lucky enough to be rescued by Eldian soldiers who, upon seeing him, gave him a warm welcome, making him smile, as did Annie. After that, Naruto, Annie, and the other Eldians on the ship arrived days later at the port of Marley, where they were greeted by many military personnel, which brings us to the present. Hee tilde, long time no see, Hanaru, said a woman of medium tall height. She had hair as black as night, eyes as red as blood, milky skin. She wore general's clothes with long sleeves of black with high-heeled boots of the same color and a skirt of the same color with white details, something like Esdeath from Akame ga Kill. She was currently a few centimeters away from Naruto looking at him with amusement in his eyes, while Naruto looked at the woman with a frown who was a head shorter than him. What are you doing here, Captain Lilith? Naruto said, frowning at Lilith, who smiled with amusement at the question. Oh, nothing really. I sensed your power days ago along with the female titan. I wanted to check it for myself, Lilith said with a smile while she faintly smelled Naruto, which made him a little nervous. Do I hear concern for me, Miss Lilith? Naruto said this time mockingly, which made Lilith smile somewhat dementedly, while Annie, who was behind Naruto, watched the interaction with mild curiosity. Oh Naru tilde, you're really funny, but no, I don't need to worry about my favorite toy. After all, who would I play with if not you? Lilith said with a demented smile, making Naruto simply look her in the eyes seriously. I see. If you'll excuse me, Miss Lilith, I need to speak with Commander Magath, said Naruto, walking past Lilith and avoiding her gaze. But before he could completely pass her, she grabbed his arm tightly, causing them both to freeze momentarily as they felt an electric current pass through their bodies. This caused Naruto to release her arm, and Lilith looked at Naruto with wide eyes and raised her hand in a signal. Suddenly, Naruto saw several soldiers wearing uniforms almost identical to Lilith's, only with pants, appear out of nowhere and point a rifle at Naruto, who watched this action with surprise, as did Annie and the Eldians on the ship. Naruto Fritz, you are under arrest for disobeying a superior's orders. Therefore, you will have to appear before the court-martial, Lilith said, this time with seriousness in her voice, which was very rare for her. This made Naruto look at the ground and kneel. Lilith gave the order, and Naruto was handcuffed. Lilith approached him and placed a kind of metal rod in his mouth, making him bite it and watch as Lilith tightened it with a satisfied look in her eyes. Time skip. 4 years later. Currently, Naruto was in a dark place without light, standing while staring into nothingness with determination. Naruto's POV. Whenever I think about that day, I remember how sad and unfair life can be, having the only person who is part of your family and not being able to hug them because the beasts are just war machines that have no feelings. But that doesn't matter, because that day when I left that dark cell I promised myself that I would create a world where they would be again, where my family could be alive again and above all where Ymir would not be hated. End of POV. Staring into space, Naruto saw light slowly entering through a hole that gradually opened, suggesting that a gate was opening, revealing Naruto's appearance, which had changed a bit in the 4 years that had passed. Since his sideburns had now grown slightly past his ears, and he had a slightly visible beard, he was currently wearing a warrior's uniform, just like the one Reiner wears at Fort Slav. Without saying anything, he approached the gate that opened completely and saw that he was meters high and watched as Fort Slav, where Middle Eastern soldiers were located, was being crushed by Titans courtesy of Zeke, who was in a zeppelin with Reiner, while Naruto was in another one which was flying over the sea. Naruto focused his gaze on his people who were watching with concern as the fort was destroyed, but then he realized the number of enemy ships at sea and decided to act. With a ring he had on his ring finger, He took out a small blade that cut him and, without any parachute, jumped from the zeppelin he was in. Diving, Naruto maneuvered to dodge several projectiles headed his way, but suddenly a beam struck him, drawing the attention of the Eldians near the fort who hadn't noticed him. Naruto transformed into the armored titan and plummeted into the water like a missile, damaging several enemy warships. But not content with this, a massive explosion, comparable to an atomic bomb, erupted where Naruto had landed. Many watched in astonishment as the colossal titan, where the armored titan had been, began destroying the remaining ships. Suddenly, Naruto felt a gunshot in his arm and looked to see the source, a warship approaching the area along with many others. This caused Naruto to frown from the back of the colossal titan's neck, but suddenly a projectile coming from behind him knocked down a ship. "We're with you now, Naruto," Zeke said through their mental connection, causing Naruto to look over his shoulder at the fortress, which was completely destroyed, while the armored titan and the beast titan were in its rubble. After that, the enemy naval force was destroyed, ending 4 years of war in which Marley was victorious. The enemy signed a peace treaty with Marley, but unbeknownst to them, the moment they so feared was approaching, as the era in which the Titans would be useless was slowly drawing near. "It's almost time to go home. Wait for me, story," Naruto thought from the back of his titan's neck as he thought about the blonde monarch of Paradise Island. So after losing 4 whole years fighting a war for the sovereign government of the peninsula, it all ends with 3 of our titans arriving under attack from enemy ships, all because of a miscalculation on your part. An elderly man in uniform, his hair swept to the side, spoke as he walked toward Magath, reading a newspaper. In a large hall, several military leaders of the Marleyan army were gathered, including Magath, Naruto, Zeke, Lilith, and others. Everyone in the room wore the Marleyan military dress uniform, which consisted of a suit and tie, trousers, a skirt in Lilith's case, and combat boots, heeled boots in Lilith's case. Although they managed to destroy the Alliance fleet, that was thanks to one of the Titan shifters and the armored Titan who protected Zeke with his body, said the same man, looking at Zeke, Magath, and Naruto, all of whom had serious expressions on their faces. Humanity finally managed to invent a weapon that blew off the colossal Titan's arm and tore the armored Titan to shreds, the man said, finishing reading the newspaper and looking seriously at Magath. "You consider this a victory, Magath? What does this mean?" the man said, frowning, while Magath remained serious, as did everyone else in the room except for Lilith, who wore a mocking smile. "Mr. Marshall, I believe the day has come when human ingenuity has finally surpassed the strength of the Titans," Magath said earnestly, while the Marshal shook his head. "In a way, I already did it, when our scientists created those 2, said the Marshal, pointing at Naruto and Lilith. The latter smiled and blew a kiss to Naruto while winking at him, causing Naruto to ignore her, which didn't bother Lilith. "You're right, but to begin with, the battle that took place was a naval battle, a battle in which our Titans serve in a limited way, and their naval strength is not comparable to that of the enemy," Magath said seriously, while a leading man of the naval forces responded. "Our marine fleet is disorganized. Are you saying that caused our failure?" said one of the Marley military leaders, frowning. "No, I'm not saying that exactly. We've been resting on our laurels and relying on the Titan's strength to protect us for far too long, and now we're seeing the results," Magath said seriously, looking at the Marshal, who looked back at him in the same way. "While we pursued our colonial policy, we depended on the Titan's power to fight for us. Other countries have been advancing, and here are the results. For now, we still have an unmatched ground force," Magath said, raising his gaze, as did everyone else in the room. "But with the advancement of aviation, they say that soon places will be able to be bombed as if it were a downpour." "What I mean is," Magath said seriously, then looked at the Marshal. "Yes, I know, in the near future we will lose our military advantage, no. We already have," said Marshal, staring into space with boredom. "We were once the heroic nation of Marley, which brought down the Eldian demons, and now look at us," said Marshal wearily, causing Zeke, Naruto, and Lilith to look at him momentarily at his last words. Zeke took action and raised his hand. "Marshal, if you'll allow me, could you give me permission to speak?" Zeke said, taking the floor, causing Lilith and Naruto to look at him with interest. "Zeke, he was once a child prodigy, you can speak," said Marshal with slight interest, looking at Zeke. "I think it's time to resume the plan to invade Paradise Island and seize the power of the founding Titan," Zeke said, causing everyone in the room to look at him strangely. "Zeke, didn't you hear? Marley has no future if it continues to depend on the Titans," Magath said, prompting Zeke to respond. "Yes, but while Marley focuses on catching up with the other countries, do you think they'll just stand idly by?" Zeke said, looking at the military leaders. "What we need is to buy time, and the way to do that is to have newspaper headlines say, Marley has retaken Paradise Island and now has all the Titan powers at its disposal, don't you think?" Zeke said seriously, while Marshal looked at him, as well as at Naruto and Lilith, the latter smiling at him with amusement. "Marshal, if you'll allow me, I'd like to say something," Naruto said seriously, making the Marshal look at him. Huh, Naruto, the hero of the Middle East battle and the survivor of paradise, go ahead and speak, said Marshall with slight interest, making Naruto nod. I agree with Zeke. If Captain Lilith and I assimilate the founding Titan, we can match the Titan's power and add more power to buy Marley more time, Naruto said seriously, making Lilith start to laugh, which confused some military leaders, but gave Naruto a slight chill down his spine. I agree with Naru, but since we're on the subject, don't you think you and I should conceive our successors, Naru? Lilith said, blushing and touching her chest. She had changed in these 4 years. Her hair was still the same length, but now she wore it tied back in a ponytail. She had bangs that framed her forehead. She was a complete beauty, but just as beautiful as she was manic in battle. It's not necessary, Captain Lilith, my successor is with me, said Naruto, causing several people to notice that behind him was a girl who appeared to be 15 years old, wearing a warrior's uniform. She had red hair that cascaded down her back and jade-colored eyes. The young woman was beautiful, but she had a cold look on her face. Similarly, behind Zeke was a blonde young man with white skin, also wearing a warrior's uniform. You have less than a year left, don't you? Said Marshall, his gaze fixed on the shifter titans in the room, who nodded in agreement. Yes, it seems the scientists were wrong about Ymir's curse, and we have less than a year left, Naruto said seriously, looking at Lilith, who simply smiled. But I already have a successor. Her name is Charlotte Fritz, Naruto said, pointing to the teenager behind him, who only nodded with a cold expression. My successor is Colt, he will inherit my power, although I am somewhat uneasy, Zeke said, making Colt look at him. That's fine, said Marshall with a bored look on his face. You're looking to regain the honor you lost when you failed 4 years ago, said Marshall looking for a response from Zeke who nodded. It was Grisha Yeager who started this, I as his former son must finish it, Zeke said, frowning. It was to be expected from the child prodigy. You've earned our trust by betraying your parents, and you have too. After all, Lilith is the girl who brought me the heads of the other generals on a silver platter, while Naruto is the boy who led us to victory against the Middle East with his great feats, said the marshal, looking at the 3 Titan shifters, who nodded in agreement, while Lilith smiled with amusement. Very well, I'll put your idea on the agenda for the next meeting, said the marshal, ending the meeting and sending everyone away. Currently, Naruto was with Zeke, Colt, and Charlotte on the rooftop of a house. Naruto was looking at the landscape of houses that were in ruins due to the war, while Charlotte was by his side without saying anything. I'm sorry about that, Colt. I made you look bad back there, Zeke said, taking out a cigarette and lighting it, making Colt shake his head while wearing an excited smile on his face. That's fine, in fact, both of you did well. 2 Eldian soldiers participating in the council giving their opinion to a Marleyan marshal, it was an honor for me to participate, Colt said with a smile on his face, making Charlotte nod. I agree, Charlotte said with an emotionless look, but with a small smile on her face, making Naruto smile and affectionately stroke her head, which made her smile a little too. You're incredible, Zeke. You can turn titans by injecting your cerebrospinal fluid into Eldians, control them even at night. It's like the progenitor titan from the stories. You're special, Zeke. You can do that even without royal blood, Colt said with a smile, making Zeke look at him, and Naruto glanced at him out of the corner of his eye before continuing to look at the scenery. Who knows? Not even scientists really know. But I think when you inherit my power you'll know, my secret, Zeke said indifferently, making Naruto have a small amused smile on his face. Your secret technique for waxing your butt, Colt said with a serious expression, making Naruto smile amusedly, while Charlotte raised an eyebrow at their strange conversation. TCH, gentlemen, we have a lady here, refrain from such conversations, said Naruto with an amused smile on his face as he covered Charlotte's ears, who said nothing about it. Oh, I don't think the lady present will mind. After all, Eldians don't need privacy, do they? Magath said, climbing the stairs to the rooftop, causing everyone there to snap to attention. No, sir, they all said, taking a firm stance, but then Magath told them to relax. You did well at the meeting, Zeke, Naruto. I must say, it's been years and I still don't know what you two think, Magath said, having Colt light a cigarette for him, while Zeke smiled sheepishly. You overestimate me, sir, Zeke said, glancing slightly at Naruto, who said nothing about it, but Charlotte gave him a light elbow to the abdomen, making him speak reluctantly. I agree, sir, said Naruto with a fake smile that seemed to convince Magath, but made Charlotte look at Naruto with a frown, causing him to shrug. So you think you can retake Paradise Island in just 1 year? Magath said, looking at Zeke and Naruto, waiting for an answer, but they both thought about it for a while. Well, we only have 1 year left to live, Zeke said, scratching his hair, while Naruto nodded. In these 3 years, we've sent several warships, but they've all been destroyed. Naruto has had to come to the rescue of several of them. Some have returned thanks to him, while the rest have disappeared, Magath said, looking at Naruto, who nodded in agreement. What does that tell you? Magath asked, seeking an answer from the warriors. I think the strength of Paradise Island has increased, since they now have 3 titanic powers, the Founder, the Attacker, and the Colossal, Naruto said with a frown as he sighed while Zeke nodded. We don't know who possesses the Colossal Titan, but we know that Eren Yeager has the Founding Titan and the Attack Titan in his possession, while the Colossal Titan's identity is unknown and has not died since no Eldian child has shown any signs of possessing it. Thanks to Naruto, the female Titan has been handed over to us and is in the possession of Annie Leonhardt, Zeke said, staring into space, describing the current situation. The island may possess 3 titanic powers, Naruto said with a frown, causing Colt and Charlotte to look at him confused. But didn't Reiner say that they didn't have the necessary knowledge? Colt asked curiously, but Charlotte was the one who answered. As far as we know, Reiner didn't explore the entire island, so there's a possibility, Charlotte said with an emotionless look, making Zeke nod. It all started with Agent Owl, who possessed the power of the Attack Titan, which he passed on to Grisha Yeager, who took refuge on the island, while the Fritz family changed their name to Reese, while continuing with their policy of non-resistance, but they were devoured by Grisha Yeager, thus regaining the memories of the world, Zeke said seriously while Charlotte and Colt paid attention and Naruto simply did not seem very attentive to the conversation. It's obvious that Eren Yeager couldn't have done that alone. Even though I didn't face them head-on, I could sense the power of the Colossal Titan active. That confirms that they now possess 3 powers when at the beginning they only possessed 2, Naruto said seriously while looking at Magath, who nodded in agreement with what he said, as did Zeke. Taking that into account, to attack the island we will have to request support from warships, Magath said, looking at both warriors. But there's another problem, Commander. Ironically, Paradise Island is one of the governments that possesses the greatest anti-Titan force, as they have an army of soldiers who wield equipment that allows them to fly. With explosive swords and spears capable of shattering even the hardest hardening, said Naruto, looking at the sky, thinking things through, while Zeke confirmed with a nod, leaving Magath thoughtful. Besides that, they possess several Ackermans, whom we believed were a myth of the royal family, who are a byproduct of the Titans. I think there are currently at least 2 left on the island. I really don't want to face one of them again, Zeke said with a thoughtful pose, but Magath pointed at Naruto, making him smile. But what are you talking about? Our blonde star here has Ackerman genes, just like Lilith Fritz, Magath said, as if Zeke had overlooked it, leaving him confused as if he had recently recovered that memory. Yes, sorry, I forgot, said Zeke, slightly confused, looking slightly at Naruto, who smiled a little, making Zeke begin to suspect him. That was dangerous, you know, Zeke said with a cigarette in his hand. Currently, the warriors were on a train heading to Liberio. Zeke was sitting at a table looking at Naruto, who was leaning against a wall of the train with a military jacket over his face, trying to sleep. Nearby was Peak, who looked at Naruto with a smile. She hadn't changed at all in these 4 years, just like Zeke. It's always dangerous, Commander, Naruto said, ignoring what Zeke was saying, which made Zeke shrug. Huh, Naruto, don't tell me that the promotion to squad captain has gone to your head, Peak said with a hint of mockery, making the aforementioned huff in annoyance. I'm not interested in being captain. If it were up to me, I'd give the position to Porco. After all, he's the most qualified here. No offense, Reiner, said Naruto, looking at Reiner, who had changed a bit in these 4 years, now sporting a more mature face and a goatee, giving him an even more mature look. You only say that because he's your protege, Reiner said with a mocking smile on his face, making Naruto look at him. He was about to reply, but someone else did it for him. I earned the right to be Braun, said Porco Galliard. He looked like a young man, of medium height and slim build, with his hair combed back, light-colored eyes, and wore combat boots and trousers along with a brown jacket bearing the sash that identified him as an honorary Eldian. TCH, if you're going to fight, do it outside. I'm trying to sleep, Naruto said irritably, causing Reiner to remain silent and say nothing, while Porco also remained silent and sat quietly. Leaving that aside, don't you think it was dangerous to take a point from the air? Zeke said curiously, making Naruto sigh, which caused Peak, Porco, and Reiner to look at him curiously. I didn't lead to victory, did I? So why question something that already happened? Naruto said with slight annoyance, making Zeke look at Naruto, who lately had been behaving aggressively, or rather, he did so every time there was a meeting with the High Command. This has something to do with Annie or Captain Lilith, doesn't it? Reiner said curiously, making Naruto frown, which confirmed his suspicions. What's wrong? Are you worried about Annie? She's with Marley's Dark Army. She'll be fine, although I'm surprised she joined Marley's elite group, Peak said with a thoughtful pose and a sleepy, even somewhat tired, look. No, I'm not worried about Annie, it's just that every time I have to introduce myself to those stupid tall people and see Lilith's unbearable face, I get in a bad mood, Naruto said with a frown, making the others look at him. Peak with a smile, Reiner with a serious look, Porco not knowing what to say, and Zeke with an emotionless face. Naruto-san, I don't think that's the way to talk about our superiors, Porco said with a frown, while the blonde looked at him and sighed in annoyance. I'm sorry, it's just that for some reason I've been feeling a bit anxious lately, Naruto said wearily. Reiner looked at Naruto with a surprised expression, while Pieck looked at Naruto with a mocking smile, which confused him. Wait, don't tell me you got Annie pregnant, Reiner said in surprise, making Naruto look at him as if he had gone crazy, causing Pieck to suddenly burst out laughing and Zeke and Porco to look at Naruto waiting for an answer. No, of course not. We're not even a couple, what's wrong with you guys? Said Naruto with a stunned look, making Pieck laugh even harder, while Zeke and Porco smiled. Reiner, on the other hand, looked confused. I thought you two were a couple. I mean you're the only one who talks to Annie and you were the one who rescued her from paradise, Reiner said, looking at Naruto, who couldn't deny what he was saying. Pieck stopped laughing at this point. Well, you're right, but I have nothing with her other than her being my best friend, Naruto said with a smile as the others accepted his words. Well, putting that aside, it seems that with Naruto-san's attack, the enemy fleet was wiped out in seconds. Combining titanic powers has been a piece of cake lately, hasn't it, Naruto? Zeke said, looking at the blonde boy who nodded. All the credit isn't for me, it seems that little Gabby helped a lot in this battle, didn't she, Reiner? Said Naruto with a smile, making Reiner nod with a frown. She wants to be a warrior, Naruto, Reiner said with a somber look, making Naruto frown. What a load of crap, Naruto said with a frown, but then he smiled when he heard the shouts of his people who were celebrating in the other car. Commander, I can go and silence them, said a Marleyan soldier from the high command who was there with them. And they heard what Naruto said, but they didn't say anything because for some strange reason the Fritz brothers had absolute immunity in Marley. Let him have fun, just tonight, and Naruto, do I look like an idiot to you? Magath said with a serious look on his face, making Naruto smile mockingly, as did Pieck, while the others remained serious. Commander, should I tell you the truth or should we remain friends? Naruto said mockingly to Magath, who had a small smile on his face. Naruto, when we get to Liberio, you'll be in trouble, Magath said with the same smile, making the blonde boy shiver slightly. Yes, Commander, Naruto said with a pale look on his face, then lay down and tried to sleep on the dining car table. Liberio, we're here, said the voice of a 12-year-old girl with short black hair tied up, large, light eyes, a medium height and a slim build. She was currently wearing a Marleyan soldier's uniform and a jacket over it while carrying a backpack. Gabby, turn down your volume, damn it, Colt said, his head throbbing. The night before they had been drinking while celebrating their victory. It's your fault for drinking so much when you know you can't handle it, Porco said as he carried Colt, who couldn't stand up because of his hangover. Who gave alcohol to my brother? Said a 12-year-old boy of medium height and slender build, with messy blonde hair, light-colored eyes, and like Gabby, wearing a Marleyan soldier's uniform. It was Pieck, said Naruto with his hands behind his neck while Charlotte followed closely behind him. But you were the one who gave me the bottles, Pieck said with a sleepy smile on her face, causing Naruto to ignore her, but receiving an elbow from Charlotte. Good heavens. To let the gift of these two be wasted like that all over the train in such an incredible way, Zeke said sarcastically, making Pieck smile while Naruto had a small smile. It turns out we should have calmed them down last night, Magath said, making the others nod in agreement. Okay, Gabby, stop yelling, Reiner said, calming his cousin who, upon hearing him, turned her attention to something else. Let Reiner have fun, after all she's still just a kid, said Lilith, leaving one of the train cars, causing Reiner to leave her alone. Huh, who are you calling snot? Gabby said, but was silenced by Reiner, who became really nervous when he felt Lilith's cold gaze. Hey Gabby, don't you think it's rude to talk to elderly people like that? Naruto said with a mocking smile, making Gabby laugh, while Charlotte next to her elbowed him, making him complain of the pain. Naru Tilda, but we're the same age, it's not fair. Lilith pouted at Naruto, who ignored her and started walking. But he suddenly stopped when he saw Annie get out of one of the train cars. She was wearing the same outfit as Lilith, only in black. Annie had changed in these 4 years, she had a more mature look than she had in previous years. Her hair was longer, with a braid down the side, but still letting some strands fall across her face. Behind her appeared several Eldians wearing a different military uniform, as it was completely black, implying that they were the elite. Hey Annie, how did your mission go? Naruto said in a friendly manner, brutally ignoring Lilith, while the blonde nodded with a neutral look as she began to walk alongside Naruto and Charlotte. After a while, the group of Eldians led by the warriors walked through Liberio, receiving brief glances from some people from Marley. After walking for a while, they arrived at the ghetto where they lived, where the families of the Eldians who were going to war were waiting for them. When several people entered, they were greeted by their families, Peak by her father, Porco by his parents, Reiner by his mother, as was Gabby, Colt by his mother and father, Zeke by his grandparents, and Annie, who said goodbye to Naruto and went to her father. The only people who didn't seem to have any family waiting for them were Lilith, Naruto, Charlotte, and a group of men, one of whom was missing a leg. These were soldiers suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Without saying anything, Naruto walked among the people with Charlotte following closely behind. From time to time he received greetings or a grateful look from one or two people, while others looked at him as if they were afraid of him. The same thing happened with Lilith, who at this moment looked at Naruto with a neutral expression, then sighed and headed towards her home. Suddenly Naruto heard someone scream imitating the sound of a bomb, causing him to turn around and look at the group of soldiers wounded in battle. Without hesitation, he went to help them. Now, Mr. Kozlo, leave them alone, said Falco, coming to the aid of the soldiers who were nervous at the sound which reminded them of the war. Ha ha ha, so what if I don't want to? Said a chubby-looking man with black hair, wearing Marley's military uniform and with a bandaged arm that appeared to be broken. Leave them alone, idiot, Naruto said with a frown, making Kozlo frown too, but he didn't say anything. Without saying anything, Naruto carried one of the missing legs on his shoulder, helping him walk, while Falco helped the others. What a way to enter, idiot, Naruto whispered to the man who had long hair down to his back, a slightly noticeable beard, wore a military uniform, and had jade green eyes. The drug works, that woman apparently didn't sense me, the man whispered to Naruto as they were on their way to the hospital, while Charlotte had gone ahead and gone home. TCH, I didn't recognize you either, Eren, said Naruto, leading the man who was Eren Yeager, who had infiltrated Marley taking advantage of the war. After that, Naruto took Eren to the hospital and left him there so as not to raise suspicion. He then walked towards his home where Charlotte was waiting for him, as she currently lived with him, since Naruto was her mentor. Time skip. To the next day. Naruto was walking with Porco and Charlotte in the Marleyan military facility where only Eldians and warrior candidates trained. They were currently on their way to a room where the warriors were going to meet. You look so sleepy, didn't you get enough rest? Said Naruto as he put his hands in the pockets of the trench coat he was wearing. It's not just that, Porco said wearily, but the three of them stopped in surprise when they saw Peak crawling on the floor. Good morning Porco, Naruto and Charlotte, Peak said with her usual disheveled appearance, looking at both of them, which made Naruto turn pale and Porco almost fall off the stairs, while Charlotte remained calm. Peak, what the hell are you doing? Porco said, trying not to fall off the ladder, while Charlotte looked at Naruto, who was still pale. Peak, damn it, I think I scared myself half to death, said Naruto as he breathed irregularly, making Charlotte look at him with a raised eyebrow. Did I scare them? Peak said curiously, looking at Naruto and Porco's faces, who were more affected. Damn, walk like a normal person, Porco said, making Peak get up and start walking with them towards the living room. Good morning, Colt said with a friendly smile, sitting in one of the armchairs in the living room with Reiner, while Zeke sat at his desk. It seems we're all here now, said Zeke, pouring tea into cups and handing it out to those who wanted it. It's strange to see us here in the Warriors' Hall. Were we summoned by a high-ranking Marleyan military officer? Porco said, sitting down in an armchair next to Naruto, prompting everyone else to sit down. But Naruto noticed that Charlotte remained standing, and upon noticing this, he immediately stood up and offered her the seat, something she initially refused, but eventually accepted. No, not here. It's all right if we have tea once in a while, right? Zeke said with a small, friendly smile, making Naruto sit on the floor by the edge of one of the armchairs where Charlotte sat beside him, discreetly giving him a smile. I know it's sudden, but the situation is critical. Naruto, could you continue? Zeke said with a hint of concern in his voice, which did nothing to deceive Naruto. Of course, during the last few years Marley has been winning several wars, for power or resources thanks to us possessors of titanic power who silenced those who opposed us, thus gaining a bad reputation in other nations, making their hatred towards us grow and grow, making it comparable to the hatred that was felt towards us when the Eldian Empire still reigned. We swore loyalty to Marley to atone for our sins, but, Naruto said, pausing to remember all the deaths, sacrifices that occurred in the wars, and the hatred that some Eldians felt for each other. As Naruto said, it's not bad in itself. But thanks to that, the voices calling for our extermination are getting louder and louder, Zeke said, causing some to look at him, confused by his point. To make matters worse, in the last battle, it became clear that the age of the Titans is over. This means that Marley can no longer continue as a superpower, putting the thin barrier that protected us from annihilation at risk of being destroyed, Zeke said seriously, causing everyone to frown at that possibility. Isn't there anything we can do? Colt said, making Zeke look at him with a neutral expression. Conquering Paradise Island as we have planned would do the world a favor by eliminating it, Zeke said seriously as he took a sip of tea. But the world hates us so much. Charlotte said, frowning at what she was about to say. Taking the power of the founding titan won't be enough, Peak said, finishing Charlotte's sentence, who nodded, making Zeke notice that point as well. That's a good point. What matters is the story and the narrative. We must prepare an article about what will happen while we recover the founding titan, Zeke said with an analytical look on the Naruto topic while he was spaced out since his gaze was on nothing. We need empathy from other countries and a narrator. Apparently, there is a family that is willing, the only Eldian noble family in Marley, the same one that has the power of the Hammer Titan in its hands, said Naruto, leaving his trance and joining the conversation, making Zeke nod. They were the first to oppose King Fritz 1,000 years ago. Despite being nobles, they are still Eldians, which doesn't allow them to interfere in wars or politics. But despite that, they are aware of the future that awaits us if we continue down this path, so they have taken action, Zeke said, while the others in the room understood what they were getting at. It sounds reasonable since the Tiber haven't used their Titan power against any enemy nation, and besides, they were the ones who betrayed King Fritz, so they have even more influence in other nations, Charlotte said, thinking about the topic, making Peak nod as she added. Therefore, if we leave this to them, the world will hear them, Peak said, completing Charlotte's thought, who nodded in agreement with what the dark-haired woman said. You're right, besides being beautiful they're intelligent, what a great catch, don't you think? Said Naruto with a mocking smile, making Peak smile sleepily while Charlotte simply stared at her hands which were in her lap while she had a slight blush. But even if they possess the Hammer Titan, the Tiber have never lifted a finger to protect this country, living in their luxurious mansions unlike us and the other Eldians who live in ghettos, but from one day to the next they decide to act as heroes. Doesn't that seem too suspicious to them? Porco said, seriously considering the matter, making Naruto shrug. I understand what you're saying, but both Tiber and Marley are worried about it, Naruto said, shrugging, making Zeke nod. We should be grateful if this plan saves our homeland, Marley, Reiner said, interrupting Porco, who was about to speak. Upon hearing his words, Porco looked at him as if something strange had been said. Our duty as warriors is to help the Tiber and help heroic Marley rise again, Reiner said, making Zeke nod and look at the group. And that's why we'll soon have a festival to celebrate it in Liberio, Zeke said, confusing some people. A festival, Reiner said, confused by what his superior was saying, which Naruto clarified for him. Basically, we will invite powerful people and reporters from all nations, and the Tiber family will make the declaration that in 1 year we will have complete control of Paradise Island. Therefore, the future of Eldia and Marley depends on this plan, so there is no room for failure, Naruto said seriously, addressing everyone in the room. Some were unknowingly being spied on by Marleyan military personnel who were in another room, causing them to agree to put the plan into action. Naruto was currently walking alone through the gloomy afternoon on the streets of the ghetto. Charlotte wasn't with him this time, as she said she had things to do. Without saying anything, Naruto stopped walking and sat on a bench where the same man who had helped him get up when they arrived at the ghetto was sitting, Eren. So, tell me, how's your stay here been, Eren? Naruto said simply, while Eren didn't seem visibly surprised that he was there talking to him. It's not bad, it seems the people here are basically the same as those on the island, Eren said while maintaining a neutral gaze, making the blonde nod. Yes, only they've been badly raised here, after all, you know, history is always written by the victor, said Naruto, looking at the sky, while Eren nodded at what the blonde said. But that doesn't matter since Eldia will rise from the ashes, Eren said in a stoic voice as he looked at Naruto, making him notice the gleam in Eren's eyes, which made him understand something. Without saying anything, Naruto nodded, leaving Eren sitting on the bench, and began walking in an unknown direction. What's wrong, Naruto? You're acting strange, Ymir said from inside her head, causing the blonde boy to think while looking at the ground, but he was abruptly stopped. Naruto-sama, thank you for always protecting us. Please take this gift of gratitude, said a woman who was with her daughter, extending a box with something inside to Naruto, who accepted it with a friendly smile. I guess it's just nostalgia, Naruto whispered in response to Ymir, who didn't say anything about it. Thanking her, the blonde continued on his way and found himself on the street where he grew up. With a somewhat somber look, he saw the house where his adoptive mother lived. Sighing deeply, Naruto was on his way there when he suddenly stopped immediately because behind him he felt the presence of his antithesis, which made him react defensively, causing Lilith to look at him with a smile and a confused look. What's wrong, Naru? Why are you so scared? Don't tell me you're afraid of me, Lilith said mockingly, making Naruto frown for a moment before looking at her with a neutral face. I'm not afraid of you, you just took me by surprise. What are you doing here, Lilith? Naruto said curiously, raising an eyebrow, while Lilith shrugged with a smile. I don't know, I was kind of alone at home so I decided to go out and see what there is to do, Lilith said with an innocent smile, making Naruto look at her strangely since Lilith rarely smiled like that. I see. Do you want to go for a coffee? Naruto said disinterestedly, making Lilith nod and smile excitedly. Yes. It'll be like a date. Just Naru and me, Lilith said excitedly, making Naruto feel a little happy for a moment to see his sister truly happy, but he pushed those thoughts out of his head and started walking. As they were walking, Lilith took Naruto by surprise and hugged his arm, holding it close to her chest. Naruto raised an eyebrow at this action, but said nothing and continued walking. When they arrived at their destination, it was an ordinary cafe located within the limits of the ghetto. Without saying a word, the owner of the place attended to them personally and quickly, giving them a table for two. Lilith, can I talk to you seriously? Naruto said with a neutral look on his face, looking at Lilith who smiled at his question. I don't know, can you? Lilith said mockingly, making Naruto sigh in annoyance at her attitude. I'm serious, Lilith, please, Naruto said with a serious look, making Lilith smile slightly. Okay Naru, I'll try to be serious, Lilith said with a small smile, making Naruto nod. Tell me, have you thought about who will get your power, Titan? Naruto said seriously, making Lilith think. Well, not really, but I have someone in mind, Lilith said with a small smile, making Naruto look at her curiously. Can I find out who it is? Naruto said with curiosity in his voice, making Lilith smile mockingly. Oh, do I hear jealousy from you, Naru? You know you can always devour me if you want, Lilith said, winking at him, making Naruto stare blankly. I'm just passing. I simply want to know who your successor will be, Naruto said seriously, looking at Lilith who didn't stop smiling. Well Naru, that's something I can't say. On the other hand, you picked up your successor from a garbage dump during the war. What an altruistic act, Lilith said with a certain mockery in her voice, making Naruto frown at her words. What can I say? I always try to do the right thing, Naruto said with a fake smile, making Lilith smile coldly. So, tell me why your rescue missions take so long. Did you go to visit your friends on the island? Lilith said, looking at him with a mocking smile, making Naruto frown. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, said Naruto defensively, making Lilith smile even more, which unsettled Naruto. I'm talking about how you assimilated the coordinate and haven't told our superiors. You've been altering the Eldians' memories so they don't clearly remember what's on the island, haven't you, hero? Lilith said with a mocking smile, making Naruto tense up, something Lilith clearly noticed. Seeing himself cornered, Naruto was about to use the ring he was wearing to transform, but Lilith acted quickly, placing her hands on Naruto's cheeks and bringing her face close, startling the other customers and leaving Naruto frozen. In that position, it seemed as if they were about to kiss, surprising Naruto and the other customers. Don't do it, Naru, it's not wise, don't you think? I'll keep your secret, but in return, I want you to obey everything I say from now on, anything at all. You can't refuse. We have a deal, Lilith whispered to Naruto, who reluctantly nodded, making Lilith smile and kiss him on the cheek. Without saying anything, she got up from her seat and left, leaving Naruto perplexed by what had just happened. The Titans are coming from the south, so the further north you go in the mountainous region, the weaker their defenses will be, Reiner said, looking at several high-ranking Marleyan military officers, including Magath, and the other warriors gathered in a room studying a map of Parody Island, planning their attack. That's just one approach. However, our battleships can only attack the southern dock if we want to save our supplies, Reiner said, looking at a Marleyan officer, who then looked at him. However, our ships have been lost off the south coast, making this point under high surveillance. In addition, it appears the pier may have been destroyed, Reiner said, causing the military officer to look at him as if nothing useful had been said. I'm simply giving the information I know, Reiner said to the military officer, who interrupted him by raising his hand. Fine, we're wrong. It's our fault for giving the Eldians the right to speak, said the soldier, causing Naruto to glance at him sideways at his words with Charlotte by his side, while the others remained silent. I thought we would at least be able to talk, said the soldier with a somewhat disappointed voice, which made Naruto leave the room with Charlotte behind him. And just like Naruto, the other warriors left the room to go to a balcony where they could watch the future warriors training. The plan to conquer Paradise Island seems to be going well, the officers seem to be somewhat wise, I want to see what plan they come up with, Porco said with a certain sarcasm in his voice, making Naruto smile slightly. How can you trust 4 kids? Peak said, leaning back on the balcony and watching the future warriors train, making Naruto laugh, but he was silenced by Charlotte who nudged him, telling him to behave, which made the other warriors smile. Wow, Falco caught up to Gabby, Reiner said in surprise, watching the training of the future warriors. Wow, all that fuss just for beating Gabby once, Naruto said with a raised eyebrow while the others continued to watch. He really doesn't understand what we've been through, Porco said seriously, while the others visibly agreed. Any Mark 1 get at this stage won't change Gabby's position as the highest, Colt said seriously, watching his brother celebrating with his friends. At that comment, Porco glanced slightly at Reiner, making Naruto and Zeke aware of what was about to happen. Who knows, the selection criteria seem quite vague, said Porco, looking at Reiner, who understood the hint. What do you mean? Even if they're the Marleyan militia, I don't think they'd make that decision. There's no need for my brother to become a warrior, Colt said seriously, making the others there look at him because of his words. Be careful, Colt, you're trying to belittle the honor of a warrior, Zeke said with a neutral look, making Colt nervous. Nah, I don't think Colt is like that. I think he was just trying to protect his little brother like a good older brother, Naruto said, making Colt nod at his words, which prompted Zeke to give his approval. If that's the case, let's go, Zeke said, walking to leave the balcony, but Colt looked at him doubtfully. Where? Colt asked, confused, so Zeke could answer him calmly. Let's play ball, Zeke said, making Colt follow him out of the balcony, leaving 4 warriors and 1 challenger behind. What's wrong, Pac? Peek said, noticing Porco's thoughtful expression. Nothing, Porco said, giving a vague answer, making Naruto smile and ruffle his hair, which annoyed him. Leave him alone, Peek is just excited for the festival, said Naruto, making Porco fix his hair, but he nodded with a smile towards Naruto. Yes, I suppose that's it, Porco said, looking back at the balcony, causing Naruto to glance sideways at Charlotte with concern, and without saying anything, he withdrew from the balcony. Time skip. To the next day. Naruto woke up early, sitting on his bed and staring into space with some concern, but then shook his head and got up, heading towards the dining room on the first floor. When he got there, he saw Charlotte looking disheveled, but still wearing her pajamas. Good morning, Charlotte, said Naruto, walking towards the kitchen looking for something to eat, while Charlotte, who was eating a sandwich, looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Good morning, what are you doing? I made you a sandwich, can't you see? He said, pointing to a plate on the dining room table. He. I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted today, Naruto said, smiling at Charlotte, who didn't say anything and simply nodded. Charlotte, do you want to go to the festival with me? Naruto asked with a smile, making Charlotte nod. Yes, I have nothing else to do, Charlotte said flippantly, making Naruto grimace as if he had been shot in the heart. My dear Charlotte, since when are you so cold to me? You should stop hanging out with Annie, said Naruto while crying comically. Meanwhile, Charlotte continued to look at him frivolously, causing Naruto to get up from his seat and kneel before her, which left her feeling out of place. What are you doing? The redhead said nervously, making Naruto look at her seriously, which made her even more nervous. Tell me if you're tired of me so we can end this once and for all. You got a boyfriend, right? Let me guess, it's Colt, isn't it? Naruto said dramatically, making Charlotte embarrassed and punch him in the head, causing Naruto to scream in pain and rub his head. Stop talking nonsense, if I were tired of you I would have left a long time ago, Charlotte said with a serious look, making Naruto smile. Well, I just thought you still lived with me since I saved you when you were a child. I didn't want you to feel obligated to stay with me, Naruto said with a melancholic smile, causing Charlotte to hug him tightly, much to his surprise, while small tears ran down her eyes. Don't be an idiot, I decided to follow you because you're important to me. You were the first person who helped me when you went on that mission to the island and only Commander Zeke, Peek, and Reiner returned. I seriously thought I'd lost you, but after seeing you come back with Annie, I felt a great relief to see you alive. You worried me so much, you idiot, Charlotte said with a smile as tears streamed down her face, causing Naruto to have a sad smile on his face. Charlotte, you're important to me too. Ha ha ha. I think it's time for you to get ready for the festival, said Naruto, breaking away from the hug. Charlotte smiled and nodded, leaving Naruto with a sad look on his face when she had left. I wish things were simpler, Naruto said with a sad look on his face, but then he shook his head and went to get ready for the festival. Do you want something to eat, Charlotte? Said Naruto, wearing his usual clothes, a black trench coat, pants, a white shirt, and black shoes. Charlotte wore a hooded jacket almost the same as the one Annie wears, with a skirt that reached their knees, and her hair was still loose. Could I get something to eat? Charlotte said with a small smile, making Naruto nod and buy her some cotton candy. After that they walked around looking at various attractions, which made Naruto and Charlotte laugh. After walking for a while, they both sat down on a bench where they were resting. What are you doing here? Don't tell me Charlotte still likes this kind of thing, Annie said, arriving in her usual civilian clothes. Naruto smiled when he saw her, as did Charlotte. What can I say? It seems she still likes being pampered by me, Naruto said with a confident smile, making Charlotte look at him with a frown, almost pouting. You were the one who brought me here in the first place, Charlotte said with a blank stare, making Naruto smile and ruffle her hair, much to her annoyance. Annie, seeing this, had a small smile. Charlotte, could you buy me something to eat, please? Annie said with a small smile, making Charlotte nod and leave, leaving the two blondes alone. You know, that was a rude way of saying, go away, Naruto said with a smile, making Annie sit down and look at the blonde boy with a neutral expression. Naruto, knowing what she meant just by seeing her gaze, sighed. Shall we still go ahead with the plan for tonight? Annie said with a serious expression, making Naruto nod. Unfortunately, yes, there's no other option. But there's a problem. Lilith suspects me and even knows I've been going to paradise. Things could get difficult, Naruto said with a frown, making Annie nod. Have you told Charlotte about this yet? Annie asked curiously, making Naruto shake his head and smile sadly. No, I don't want to involve her in any of this, Naruto said with a sad look that made Annie feel empathy for the blonde boy. Anyway, our squad will be in the vicinity of the event, keeping watch from the tops of the buildings. There's a chance we can eliminate Lilith's special squad before things get more complicated, Annie said seriously, making Naruto frown at the mention of the squad. They will be a problem, but if Lilith uses her progenitor power it will be easier to take her down, Naruto said, thinking about the situation, but then quickly changed the subject when he noticed Charlotte approaching. Anyway, I think we can meet at 6 or earlier to go to the event together, Annie said with a small smile, making Naruto nod. Annie thanked Charlotte for what she brought and left. Why didn't he stay with us? Charlotte said, confused, making Naruto smile mockingly. I don't know, maybe she's a little busy or she just felt intimidated by you, Charlotte, Naruto said with a mocking smile, which made Charlotte look at him neutrally. Oh yeah, I don't understand why, Charlotte said sarcastically, making Naruto still smile mockingly. Isn't it obvious that my little one is getting more beautiful every day? Naruto said without thinking, with a genuine smile, making Charlotte surprised by what he said. I'm your little one, Charlotte said with a gloomy look, making Naruto realize his mistake. Hey Charlotte, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, said Naruto, thinking he had offended Charlotte, but to his surprise she hugged him tightly while tears streamed down her face. Ever since I was 9, I've always wanted to call you Dad, but I was afraid you wouldn't like it, Charlotte said through tears of happiness, making Naruto smile sadly as he hugged her protectively. Since I found you when you were 7, I considered you like a daughter, but I didn't say anything because I knew what it was like to lose your parents, Naruto said with a melancholic smile, which made Charlotte separate from him. That means that from now on I can call you Dad, Charlotte said with a happy smile, which Naruto found beautiful, and without saying anything, he kissed her on the forehead. Charlotte, no matter what happens, you will always be my daughter, Naruto said with a happy smile, while Charlotte smiled back. Currently, Naruto was with the other warriors gathered in their military dress uniforms. They were now approaching the event where the Tiber family would be the host. Oh, they're here, Peak said, looking at the children who were arriving, making Colt turn around to look. Oh, where's Falco? Colt asked his brother, curious and worried. He said he found someone he knew and went somewhere, said one of the children, who had a resemblance to Bertolt in some ways. This boy wore glasses and a somewhat elegant suit for the occasion. This boy was a friend of Gabby and Falco. She also said he was an amazing boy, said a blonde girl who bore a certain resemblance to Annie. She was wearing a black sweater with a shirt underneath, pants, and shoes. This girl was Zofia, a friend of Falco and Gabby. Huh, is anyone here like that? Peak said curiously, making Naruto smile, ready to speak, but he was stopped by Charlotte, who was next to him and shook her head while having a neutral look, telling Naruto that now was not the time for jokes. Will it be alright? We've been told to take a seat inside, said Porco, looking at the other warriors, but Falco suddenly appeared, visibly excited. Where did you go? Gabby said, looking at Falco, who completely ignored her and looked at Reiner, who looked at him curiously. Vice Commander Reiner Braun, please accompany me for a moment, Falco said with an excited look on his face, making Naruto sigh and discreetly glance at Zeke, who nodded. Right now, said Reiner, not wanting to miss the event, which made Zeke look at his watch. Alright, there's still some time before the curtain rises, Zeke said, making Reiner nod and leave with Falco. Seeing that the plan was about to begin, Naruto also played his card. Huh, I think I forgot something at home. I'll be back soon. Go find your seats, said Naruto as he walked away from the place. I'm coming with you, Charlotte said, clinging to Naruto, making him smile and ruffle her hair, much to her annoyance. Ha ha ha, not at all, miss. You're staying here with Zeke. He'll take care of you while I'm gone, Naruto said with a mocking smile, making Charlotte blush slightly with embarrassment. I'm not a child anymore, you know, Charlotte said with a frown, but she was ignored by Naruto who walked home. Huh, since when do you act like father and daughter? It's nice to see you behave like that, Peak said curiously, making Charlotte smile slightly. Well, Naruto has already accepted me as his daughter, not legally, but he'll take care of that later, Charlotte said, making the others smile at the news. Well, even if it's not legal, we should celebrate, Peak said with a smile, looking at Charlotte who nodded. Naruto walked through the cold and lonely streets of the ghetto as most people were watching the show put on by the Tiber family. You're late, Naruto, said a female voice from the shadows. When the person emerged from the shadows, she revealed herself to be Mikasa, who hadn't changed much in these 4 years. The only difference was that she now had shorter hair. She wore an anti-personnel maneuvering suit which was completely black with protective plates on various parts of her body. On her chest, she wore the insignia of the Legion, which were the wings of freedom. Levi was behind her wearing the same uniform, but with a black cape on top bearing the same symbol as Mikasa, and he also had a common 3D suit with swords. I'm sorry, it's difficult to persuade others, Naruto said with a friendly smile, trying to lighten the mood. You don't have to be friendly, stupid blondie, just come with us, Levi said with a cold stare, which didn't affect Naruto, who smiled at the insult and followed them. After following them, Naruto was equipped with 3D gear similar to Levi's, but with separate pistols in addition to the swords. Once equipped, Naruto joined Annie, who had also been equipped, but with anti-personnel gear. When they were ready, Naruto positioned himself on one of the rooftops and gave Annie a pill, which she took. This pill served to conceal his Lilith essence. While on one of the rooftops, Naruto took out something from his clothes, which was a porcelain mask, and put it on. On it was a drawing of a demon, similar to the face of the Earth Demon. Haven't they registered any movement yet? Magath said with some concern in his voice, looking at a soldier who shook his head. We have nothing here either, Commander Magath. I don't register any Titan power in motion, said Lilith, who was in her battle uniform, looking at the area with a serious tone in her voice. Don't hesitate to let me know of any movement, it's very important, Magath said worriedly, putting on his binoculars and beginning to watch the Tiber's actions. The show told the story of the bad side of Eldia, which was completely a hoax created by Marley and the Tiber, although some parts were true. Let's get to today's matter, a fact that everyone knows, but isn't entirely true. These are the memories of the Warhammer Titan, which were inherited by my family. We will tell you the truth, here for the first time. This is the story of the Great Titan War 100 years ago, said the head of the Tiber family, Willie Tiber, a blond man with shoulder-length hair and a beard, dressed in clothes befitting a nobleman as he recounted the history of Eldia. The one who ended the Titan War 100 years ago wasn't Helos or the Tiber family, it was King Fritz himself. To be precise, it was Karl Fritz, the 145th king, who lamented the cruel history of the Eldian Empire before inheriting the founding Titan. He was tired of the internal wars that occurred among the same race, and above all, he felt sorry for Marley, the kingdom he had abused for so long, Willie said, surprising many in the audience. But he continued his story anyway. He allied himself with the Tiber upon inheriting the founding Titan and sacrificed himself to end the history of the Eldian Empire. King Fritz and the Tiber family devised a strategy by inventing a Marleyan hero, Helos. When the Eldian Empire collapsed in the Civil War, he moved a few Eldians to Parody Island and sealed the bridges in the walls. He then left a message that he would take revenge with millions of colossal titans if the peace was disturbed, but that was never his intention. He made a vow of peace so that neither side would be disturbed, and this ideology has been passed down to all those who possess royal blood and the power of the all-powerful founding Titan, Tiber said seriously, looking at the surprised audience. If they want to invade Paradise and seize the power of the founding Titan, it will be accepted. If Marley wants to exterminate the Eldians, it will be accepted. Eldia's sin is too great to be atoned for. To begin with, the Eldians and the Titans should never have existed. We corrected what went wrong, but until that rematch, I want to enjoy Paradise a little longer within the walls where there are no disputes. That's what the king said, Willie said, looking at the audience who were truly surprised. If the king of the walls is not a threat, then who is a threat to us? We have believed in Paradise until now, said one of the leaders of the foreign countries. However, a coup has recently taken place within the walls, in which the power of the founding Titan was seized from the royal family. Once again, the world faces a crisis, as a person who resists King Fritz's wishes has appeared. The name of the rebel who stands in our way to peace is Eren Yeager, Willie said with a serious expression, looking at the audience who exchanged confused glances. General, the warriors disappeared along with the soldiers who called them, said an alarmed soldier, alerting Magath, who frowned at this. Use the reserves to search for them, Magath said desperately, prompting the soldier to take action. How strange, for some reason I can't feel them, this has never happened to me before, Lilith said, frowning and concentrating. It doesn't matter, it started anyway, Magath said, frowning at the stage, sending Lilith off to join her squad. Returning to the stage, Willie continued his speech to the audience, who were still curious to know where he was going to end up. Yes, the people directly involved in this are you and me, as long as we live in this world. During the previous war, There were weapons that surpassed the Titans, but let's be realistic, current weapons are no match for millions of colossal Titans. Once the attack begins, there's nothing we can do. We, humanity, will only be able to listen and hide from the sound of the apocalypse's footsteps. Absolutely everything will be trampled. However, the imminent danger is the fault of the Eldians. I hate my blood and wish I had never been born if possible. I wish there were a world without Eldians. More than any other. But I didn't want to die. It's because I was born into this world. Please, fight together against the demon of Paradise Island. Willie said, tears streaming down his face, knowing what was coming. If we unite, we can defeat any evil and achieve peace. I, Willie Tiber, as an envoy of the Marleyan government, desire peace. Willie said, feeling extremely nervous. I hereby declare war on the enemy forces of Paradise Island. Willie shouted, causing the attacking Titan to emerge from the building behind him, destroying the structure and killing several Eldians. The world watched in horror as Willie was crushed and thrown into the sky by the attacking Titan, killing him instantly. It's time to return to the war, said Naruto from behind his mask, seeing that it was time to move, just like Annie. Naruto said on one of the rooftops of one of the houses near where Eren had caused that commotion by killing the heir of the Tiber family and the high command of Marley. Naruto watched with a blank stare as Eren in his Titan form killed some Eldians and leaders of other nations who had come to see Willie Tiber's spectacle. Suddenly, he felt a pressure in his instincts, making him look in a direction not far from Eren where there was a maid, who was Willie's sister and the current possessor of the Hammer Titan. Suddenly a blinding light illuminated the dark night in Librio when a lightning bolt struck the place where the Tiber maid was, causing a 17-meter-tall Titan to slowly appear, but before it could fully transform, Eren launched himself at the Hammer Titan and punched it hard in the face, sending it flying. Throwing it against a building, Eren hardened his knuckles and began to savagely punch the Hammer Titan, which was lying on the ground, but suddenly the Hammer Titan caused a large hardened pillar to pierce the attacking Titan's abdomen, lifting it up and leaving it in the air without being able to move. From his Titan form, Eren frowned as the Hammer Titan rose and began to regenerate, its form becoming complete. It now resembled a Titan with a mask that almost entirely covered its mouth and eyes, which were visible only through slits. The Hammer Titan conjured a long hammer of titanic hardening out of thin air. Without a word, it glared at Eren, who stood helplessly before the impending attack. Suddenly, Eren grabbed the hardened pillar with his bare hands and smashed it with brute force, narrowly dodging the Hammer Titan's attack. Eren, still with a piece of pillar embedded in his abdomen, looked at one of the nearby buildings where Marleyan soldiers were located. Without saying anything, they began firing at him. Seeing this, Eren hardened his hands and arms to shield himself from the shots that were heading towards him. Seeing this, the Hammer Titan tried to take advantage of the situation and attacked with its massive hammer. Eren shielded his head with his hardened arms, but they couldn't withstand the Hammer Titan's force, causing his arms and head to be shattered. This left the back of his Titan's neck exposed, meaning Eren was almost completely outside his form. He frowned at the Hammer Titan and watched as it prepared to deliver the final blow. The usurper, Eren Yeager, do you have any last words before you die? Said the Tiber family maid from the Hammer Titan, ready to kill Eren, who didn't seem scared of death at all. Do it now, Mikasa, Eren said seriously, making Naruto hear him and give the signal, causing Mikasa to move. Mikasa suddenly appeared behind the Hammer Titan with 4 thunder spears on each arm, and with great skill she fired all 8 spears into the back of the Hammer Titan's neck, causing its head to blow to pieces. Khan Magath. Suddenly, several soldiers who were not from Marley stormed onto the rooftops of the houses, attacking the Marleyan soldiers. These soldiers were wearing the same clothes as Mikasa, implying that the people from the walls had invaded Marley. Naruto, I honestly didn't imagine this from you, Magath said upon seeing Naruto wearing the demon mask, who had killed several Marleyan soldiers. The age of the Titans is over, it was now or never, Naruto said seriously as he looked at the other soldiers of the Legion and nodded. Beware of Lilith, she's already gone with her squad. Run if you don't want to die, Magath said in a monotone voice, making Naruto frown, and without saying anything he headed towards where Eren was, who was in the middle of the battlefield on the back of his shattered Titan with Mikasa by his side. Eren, get ready for the next round. Now comes the toughest one, said Naruto, landing on the back of Eren's Titan's neck, who looked at him confused, as did Mikasa. Eren, do you realize what you've done? You killed children and civilians. This is irreversible, Mikasa said worriedly, while Eren didn't know what to say. If Naruto hadn't told us you were here, you'd be dead right now, Mikasa said, her voice breaking, almost as if she were about to cry. Mikasa, it's not the time to reproach him, the Hammer Titan is still alive, Naruto said seriously, while Eren also became serious. Suddenly the Hammer Titan emerged from the rubble and reattached its head to its body, and from its hand a hardened crossbow was created, causing Mikasa, Eren, and Naruto to move away from the nape of Eren's Titan, dodging the crossbow's shot. You guys take care of the Hammer Titan, Eren, devour it if necessary, I have to go against a bigger fish, said Naruto, making Eren and Mikasa look at him somewhat confused, but out of nowhere a blinding light and 4 lightning bolts fell simultaneously not far from where the battle was taking place. When the light and rays ceased, 4 titans stood before Naruto, Mikasa, and Eren, making the latter two look confused. Reiner, Zeke, and Annie. How can the latter two be on Marley's side? Eren said, confused, looking at the armored titan, beast, female titan, and another hammer titan slowly approaching his location, making Naruto frown. It's not them. It's Lilith's progenitor legion, in other words. Her special squad, Naruto said with a frown, watching as the titans slowly approached. One of them wore a somewhat unsettling smile. It was the female titan. Without saying anything, Naruto used his 3D equipment and flew towards where the 4 titans were, getting close to them. I must congratulate you, Naru. You and Annie managed to take down my colossal titan, jaw titan, and quadruped titan before I could activate them, but your act of rebellion ends here. When I'm done with you, I will torture you and make you watch as I myself destroy your friends on the island, said the voice of that female titan, who had holes in her arms and legs that were slightly emitting steam, while her hair was as black as Lilith's and fell freely like a waterfall. Her height, unlike Annie's, was 16 meters. Naruto frowned at this. He was ready to fight those 4 titans, but he stopped when he was surprised to see that fake beast titan fall quickly without anyone expecting it, courtesy of Annie who, by dodging the other titans, quickly approached Naruto. Your assumption is correct. They aren't really shifter titans. Simply destroying their nape will defeat them, said Naruto with a smile on his face as he looked defiantly at Lilith, who glared at him from the back of her titan's neck with a frown. This time, who will be the sword and shield? Annie said in a monotone voice, looking at the 3 titans standing in front of them. Well, I wouldn't mind being your shield, my lady, Naruto said with a mocking smile, making Annie look at him with an emotionless face. If you keep this up, I'll tell history, but seriously. You're the Ackerman, you must be the sword, Annie said seriously, making Naruto nod as Annie prepared to transform. Ha ha ha, you know I'm just joking, but about the other thing you're right, let me give you some help, said Naruto, cutting his hand and causing blood to flow from his palm, which he smeared on Annie's forehead. Without saying anything, she nodded, and suddenly a beam of light struck her, transforming her into the female titan, while Naruto, with the 3D team, positioned himself on Annie's shoulder. Annie's titan looked somewhat different than normal, as it had a kind of hardened armor covering vital parts of her body. It seems that royal blood does enhance titanic powers. Let's go, Naruto said seriously as Annie charged at the 3 titans with Naruto on her shoulder. With Eren. Mikasa, who hadn't wasted any time, was attacking the hammer titan with the thunder spears, forcing it back, while Eren, in his human form, was far from the battle analyzing the hammer titan's body. According to what Naruto said, the body wasn't located at the nape of the neck like the other titan shifters. His words are true, since its body forms from its feet and not from the nape of its neck like the other titans, Eren thought, watching as a kind of rope emerged from the hammer titan's foot and reached the stage's rubble. The hammer titan's true body is here. Beneath the stage, Eren thought as he bit his hand, transforming into the attack titan and alerting the hammer titan. Eren quickly grabbed the body of the hammer titan's host, the Tiber maid, who was encased in crystal with several fleshy connections linking her to the hammer titan. Eren took these connections and destroyed them, causing the hammer titan's body to fall defeated. Eren was ready to devour the hammer titan, but behind him, perched on one of the buildings, was the jaw titan, ready to devour Eren. The jaw titan leapt and bit Eren's neck, but before it could bite him hard, Levi descended with surprising speed from one of the nearby buildings with the 3D maneuver gear, cutting the jaw titan's jaw and preventing it from biting. Taking advantage of this, Eren grabbed the jaw titan by the hair and slammed it against the building, but before he could do anything else, the hammer titan hardened its fingers, turning them into claws with which it cut off Eren's hand and escaped. But before he could go any further, the jaw titan was cornered by the Legion, who were ready to finish him off. But before they could reach him, a series of shots forced them back, causing some casualties. When they saw the culprit, it was the quadruped titan in its battle armor with its firing turret. Taking advantage of the commotion, the hammer titan created another body, causing a hardened pillar to erupt from the ground and pierce Eren's abdomen. Suddenly, heavy footsteps sounded, alerting the Legion, who frowned as the beast titan slowly approached them. Don't let them escape. Annihilate them, Zeke said as Peek and Porco positioned themselves to his right and left respectively. Don't die. Survive, Levi said as the Legion soldiers followed him in their attack towards Zeke. With Naruto and Annie, moments before. Naruto gripped the swords of Team 3D tightly while frowning at Lilith, who was in her titan, while next to her were replicas of the armored titan and the hammer titan. It's been a long time since I've seen Lilith's progenitor power up close. It's amazing that she has the special ability to inject her cerebrospinal fluid into other Eldians, allowing them to obtain 5 of the 9 titan powers, Naruto thought, while giving a signal to Annie. Without saying anything, she ran towards Lilith, hardening her knuckles, ready to attack. Before he reached Lilith, Naruto flew with the 3D team and with great agility took the thunder spear he had previously placed on his back and proceeded to fire it at Lilith, but before he could reach her the armored titan positioned himself defensively, placing his arms in a cross shape, causing his arms to be shattered. TCH. We'll have to destroy the copies first, Naruto said, landing far from the area. He looked at Annie, who had taken advantage of the situation and, with her knuckles and forearms hardened, delivered a powerful lariat to the armored titan, sending it crashing to the ground. She was about to finish it off, but before she could make another move, she had to dodge a large pillar of hardening, courtesy of the hammer titan copy. And distract Lilith for a few moments. We have to take care of those two, Naruto said through his mental connection with Annie. Annie nodded without saying anything and ran forcefully towards Lilith, who hadn't moved from where she was, much to Naruto's curiosity. But without thinking much about it, he acted immediately when he saw that the armored man was going to get in the way again, but this time he didn't have his hands to use as a shield, so Naruto acted quickly and with great force fired a thunder spear, the only one he had left, into Lilith's jaw, making it fly into 1,000 pieces. These spears are more powerful since they have 4 in 1. Without wasting any time, Annie took advantage of the situation and grabbed the upper jaw of the armored titan replica and ripped off its head, causing it to be defeated, but Annie could not dodge the hardened pillar that came out of the ground courtesy of the hammer titan replica. Without wasting any time, the replica of the hammer titan created a crossbow and fired, causing Annie to try to cover herself with her arms, which then became impaled on each other by the shot. Naruto, who was watching this, was going to intervene, trying to destroy the replica of the hammer titan. But before she could get close to him, Lilith finally moved and with surprising speed for a titan intercepted Naruto and struck him hard with both hands, causing him to fall heavily to the ground. The force of the impact caused several of Naruto's organs to be destroyed, making him spit out a large amount of blood from his mouth. I told you, Naru. You can't oppose me, and as I promised, you'll see how I kill your friends one by one, Lilith said from her titan form while Naruto struggled to regenerate and stop the bleeding. But again, he looked at Lilith with curiosity, as she moved at an amazing speed for a titan. Looking at her closely, he saw that certain parts of her body had holes that were emitting steam, making Naruto's eyes widen. Ymir, are you there? I need you to do something for me, Naruto thought as he contacted Ymir, who took a while to respond for some strange reason, which worried Naruto a little. I know what you want. I'll do it, Ymir said as Naruto nodded and tried to get up, much to Lilith's curiosity. So you can still get up. There's no need to. Just stay down, Lilith said, causing a hardened prison to emerge from beneath Naruto. When Naruto saw it, he tried to escape, but Lilith grabbed him with her hand and hardened it, suffocating him in the process. Then, without further ado, she severed her own hand and nailed it to the ground like a prison. Take care of Annie, Lilith said from her titan form, causing the replica of the hammer titan to nod and create a large, hardened hammer. Gathering momentum, the replica of the hammer titan was about to strike Annie hard on the head. Seeing this, she tried to escape in the same way as Eren, but before she could try, the arrow that was stuck in her arms expanded, completely immobilizing her. Without thinking twice, the replica of the hammer titan struck Annie's titan's head with force, blowing it into 1,000 pieces to Lilith's satisfaction, but her face then turned serious when she saw that Annie was not on the back of that titan's neck. Plan B. Naruto shouted, biting his hand, which immediately transformed him into the titan form he used against Eren during their training back then. Without wasting any time, he made a large hardened pillar pierce the hammer titan's abdomen, causing Lilith to be surprised, but then she frowned and gritted her teeth. Lilith was about to counterattack, but before she could get close to Naruto, another beam of light struck nearby. Annie transformed back into the female titan, forcing Lilith back. Meanwhile, Naruto clasped his titan's hands together as if in prayer, and out of nowhere, a multitude of hardened thorns erupted from the ground, piercing the hammer titan replica's body. It was instantly immobilized, and before it could make a move, Naruto charged at it with incredible speed. Wielding a massive axe made of hardened material, he severed the replica's head, destroying it in seconds. Having finished off that titan, Naruto ran towards Lilith, who was in a fighting stance. Annie, seeing Naruto, stood beside him. It seems they've cornered me, but even so, they won't be able to defeat me, Lilith said in a confident voice. Annie was the first to step forward and was ready to put her in a hold and take her down. But when she tried to do so, she was pushed away by Naruto, who got between her and Lilith, who in a defensive mode had created a 2-meter radius filled with hardened thorns which completely pierced Naruto, while Annie watched in surprise as Naruto's titan body was gushing blood. Damn it, Annie, concentrate. She's not like the other close quarters titan shifters. She could be on a higher level than Zeke and even me in handling her titan power, Naruto said through the connection with Annie, who felt stupid for going against Lilith like that. TCH, sorry, so how will we defeat her? Annie said as she stood up and attacked the moment Lilith approached Naruto, causing Lilith to jump away while Annie took a defensive position in front of Naruto. Annie, attack with everything you have. I have a plan, Naruto said, contradicting himself, making Annie hesitate for a moment, but she attacked anyway. Lilith, seeing this, hesitated for a few moments. But she smiled after seeing Annie approach, causing several thick thorns to pop out of the ground with a single step. Annie, stiffening her legs, broke the thorns, slightly surprising Lilith. Then she smiled with a touch of sadism and got into a fighting stance, ready to go against Annie, who, as she approached, tried to take Lilith down with a hold. But to her surprise, Lilith moved with great agility, while steam came out of some orifices of her body as if she were some kind of machine. Taking Annie by surprise, she pulled a hardened blade from her hand and stabbed her in the abdomen, causing the blade to expand throughout Annie's body, paralyzing her in the process. With a swift movement, Lilith sliced off Annie's Titan's head as if it were hot butter. Smoke began to release Annie's headless body to the point of resembling a plume of smoke. Lilith smiled with satisfaction at this, but after a moment, a hook shot out from within the smoke, piercing her Titan's shoulder. Upon seeing his attacker, he realized it was Naruto, who had blood all over his uniform as it evaporated at an amazing speed. Naruto flew towards Lilith intending to go for the back of her neck while carrying the swords of Team 3D. Seeing this, Lilith tried to harden her neck as quickly as possible, but seeing that she wasn't going to make it in time, she covered it with her hand. To her surprise, Naruto didn't go for the back of her neck, but for her eyes, leaving her completely blinded. Lilith, using her instincts, sensed Naruto in the air and, in an attempt to attack him, used the steam emitted from her arms to move them at a surprising speed for a Titan, but Naruto dodged with great agility, cutting one of her arms in the process. Naruto frowned and, with great speed, severed the tendons of her knees, causing Lilith to be unable to stand and remain on her knees. Annie, now, said Naruto as Annie emerged from the back of his Titan's neck with two thunder spears in her hands. With great agility, Annie fired the two thunder spears, each with 4 spears, into Lilith's Titan's mouth, causing its jaw to explode into 1,000 pieces. As she did so, Annie moved away from the area to a safe distance from what was about to happen. With great agility, Naruto entered Lilith's Titan's mouth and reached the inner part of its neck, looking Lilith face to face, who looked at him with pure surprise on her face. Goodbye, Lilith, said Naruto, biting his hand, causing a gigantic explosion with a reduced radius to occur. When the explosion ceased, the body of the colossal Titan could be seen, but only from the waist up. Naruto emerged from the nape of the colossal Titan, breathing heavily. The battle with Lilith had left him exhausted. He. Ha 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 ha. You almost killed me there, you wretch, said Lilith from a great distance away from Naruto. She was seriously injured, half of her face exposed and bleeding profusely. Her body was no better. Her left arm was gone and her left leg was also destroyed, all while she bled out, creating a gruesome sight. TCH, damn it, that was to be expected from you, Naruto said irritably, but he looked up at the dark sky above Libero and saw a blimp flying over the city with a small smile. It's almost time to go, Naruto said, jumping off the colossal Titan and walking calmly toward Lilith, who was struggling to stay conscious. All of this was being watched by Annie, who was ready to kill Lilith if she tried anything. Naruto stood in front of her and smiled benevolently, touching her blood-covered forehead with 2 of his fingers. Lilith, don't follow me. I know we've never gotten along. I never liked the way you do things. You're very violent. I can't tell you now, but what I'm planning will save this world and restore your memory of who you are. Lilith, you're not my enemy, so please rest, Naruto said with the same pious smile, looking at Lilith, who looked at him curiously. But suddenly, Lilith fell defeated to the ground, unconscious. Upon seeing this, Naruto sighed and fell back onto his butt, realizing that it was all over, or at least his part was over. Annie, seeing that Naruto was weak, took him by the shoulder and walked with him towards where the others were. With Eren and the others. Dodge it, here it comes, said Jean, wearing the same uniform as Mikasa, as he dodged one of the rocks that Zeke threw with the intention of killing them. They were going to counterattack Zeke, but Peak covered him from behind with her armor and turret that fired bullets, killing the soldiers in the process. One of them was going to knock Peak down, but Porco, from his jaw Titan, knocked one of them down, preventing Peak from being knocked down. That was close, thanks Porco, Peak said from her Titan, as Porco emerged from the back of the jaw Titan's neck to speak to Peak. You have to be more careful, even though Ackerman is nearby, we have to be alert, Porco said seriously while Peak nodded. Don't worry, we've cornered them, the ground is ours, we just have to defend Commander Zeke and we'll win this battle, Peak said from her Titan, while Porco said nothing about it. Exactly, Peak, you're absolutely right, Zeke said from his Titan form, grabbing stones with both hands and turning them into rubble. In one swift motion, he hurled the debris, clearing the battlefield without injuring anyone. Eren Yeager is not my enemy, Zeke said, raising his arms in a gesture of peace. Aren looked at him, holding the Hammer Titan's wielder in his hand, unable to devour her since she was encased in hardened crystal. I'll start with you, Levi. I know you're there. Your time is running out, Zeke said, gathering rubble again, ready to attack. Suddenly a huge explosion made everyone look towards the dock and some saw with surprise the colossal titan who was currently possessed by Armin who destroyed the Marley naval fleet, not completely, but the vast majority. Seeing this, Porco tried to attack Aren, but Mikasa intervened. Meanwhile, the Survey Corps tried to take down Peak, but she retreated. However, Zeke was struck down with a single blow by Levi. All of this was witnessed by Magath, who had escaped, Gabby, who had survived the attack, and Falco, who had also survived thanks to Reiner. Without saying a word, Levi dropped a bomb on the Beast Titan's neck, surprising Magath, Gabby, and Falco. Meanwhile, Peak and Porco were surprised to see their commander fall so easily. They were then taken by surprise by the Legion, who attacked Peak. She defended herself with her turret. Sasha, who was hiding in some barrels on the same roof as Peak, aimed the rifle she was holding at the Eldians controlling Peak's turret. When the shot hit, it killed one of Peak's turret operators in seconds. Upon seeing this, he ran furiously on all fours towards Sasha, but before he reached her, Jean stepped between them and fired a thunder spear at the quadruped titan's armor, disarming it in the process. Now, fire at will, Jean shouted, causing the other soldiers of the Legion to attack with more thunder spears, killing the other Eldians who controlled Peak's turret and completely destroying the quadruped titan's armor. Seeing that she could not escape, Peak threw herself off the building, landing badly injured on her titan's body, to the surprise of Magath, Falco, and Gabby, who had a look of complete shock on their faces. No, stop, don't continue, Falco whispered as tears threatened to spill from his eyes. Jean climbed down from that roof with the intention of finishing off Peak. Quickly, deliver the coup de grace, said Jean, holding a thunder spear ready to kill Peak, but before he could, Falco stepped between Peak and Jean, trying to save her. Please stop, don't shoot, Falco said desperately, making Jean hesitate to shoot, but he shot anyway, but suddenly steam came out of Peak causing the shot to miss. What was that? Failure. Was it the steam or was it? Jean thought, frowning as he watched Peak's body emerge from the nape of the badly wounded quadruped titan. It's the true body of the quadruped titan, finish her off immediately, said one of the Legion soldiers, but before they could approach, Marleyan soldiers began firing to defend Peak. Falco, take Peak away from here, Braun, help him, Magath said as he helped his soldiers protect the quadruped titan. With Aren and Porco. Aren was still with the crystallized body of the Hammer Titan since he could not devour it, while Porco was on one of the roofs of a building with Mikasa who was keeping him entertained so that he would not attack Aren. We've lost Commander Jaeger, and Peak, Naruto, and Captain Lilith are nowhere to be found. Does that mean they've been neutralized? Does that mean we've lost? Damn it, Porco thought, frowning angrily as he nimbly dodged Mikasa and headed straight for Aren, intent on finishing him off once and for all. But before he could fully reach him, Aren hardened his knuckles and delivered a powerful hook that sent him crashing to the ground. To Aren's surprise, Porco had latched onto his arm and bit his hand with his jaws, completely destroying it. Seeing Aren's shock, Porco took advantage and slashed Aren across the face, gouging out one of Aren's titan eyes in the process. Not stopping there, he grabbed Aren's head for leverage and was ready to rip out the other eye, but Aren positioned the crystal containing the Hammer Titan's owner and watched in astonishment as Porco's swipe shattered the crystal when Aren's teeth were crushed on contact. Before Porco could launch another attack, Mikasa intervened, causing Porco to back away, much to Mikasa's frustration. Tisk, it's very fast. This Jaw Titan doesn't look anything like Ymir's, it's more like the one Naruto possesses, Mikasa said with a frown, watching the Jaw Titan from afar, while Aren also looked at it, but with slight curiosity. So this one's the same as Naruto's, huh? Aren thought, an idea forming in his head. According to the plan, Aren was supposed to capture the crystallized Hammer Titan and give it to Naruto to open. Suddenly, everyone's attention focused on a hot airship flying over Liberio, and Porco frowned when he saw it. They think they can escape by airship, Tiskai won't let them do it, damn demons, Porco thought, jumping towards the airship with the intention of bringing it down, but before he could reach the airship through the buildings, Mikasa intercepted him before he could get there. I knew you'd try that, Mikasa said, cutting off Porco's legs and leaving him incapacitated, making it impossible for him to walk in his Titan form. Taking advantage of this, Aren grabbed him by the hair and forcefully ripped off his arms, leaving him completely defenseless. After that, he put the crystal containing the holder of the Hammer Titan into the mouth of Porco's Titan, using it like a kind of nutcracker. Without further ado, Aren grabbed Porco and opened his large mouth, using Porco to open the crystal and causing the cerebrospinal fluid and blood of the Hammer Titan to fall into Aren's mouth while being observed by Mikasa, Gabby and Falco. The latter two were in a building in the distance. Aren had just devoured the Hammer Titan, much to the surprise of the Marleyan soldiers. Not stopping there, he grabbed Porco and was ready to devour him, but before he could, Reiner emerged from the rubble, transformed into the armored titan. He stared seriously at Eren, who, without saying a word, rushed to strike him. Seeing this, Reiner tried to block the blow, but before he could, Eren moved forward and sent him crashing to the ground in seconds. Mikasa, who was nearby, watched with a blank stare, and the Marleyan soldiers were astonished by this. But upon closer inspection, Reiner had snatched Porco from Eren's hands, causing him to emerge from the nape of his titan, and Mikasa positioned herself on his shoulder. Reiner came to end the show anyway. I don't have the energy left to keep fighting. Besides, Naruto is supposed to be here as we agreed. If I fight Reiner alone now I might not be able to kill him, Eren said seriously as he looked at Reiner and Porco lying on the ground. If that's the case, then let's go home, said Mikasa, taking Eren and heading towards the airship that would take them out of Liberio. Goodbye Reiner, Eren said with a somewhat sad look on his face as he was carried away by Mikasa. Reiner was weak, so he couldn't get up to continue fighting, letting Eren escape. With Naruto, moments before. What are we doing here? Should we go to the airship? Annie said in an emotionless voice as she held Naruto by the shoulder. Suddenly, he let go, making Annie look at him curiously. Naruto smiled wearily at her and spoke. You go ahead, Annie-chan. I have something to do before I leave, Naruto said with a smile. Annie hesitated for a moment, but Naruto smiled back to reassure her. Without saying anything, Annie nodded and left using the 3D device. Naruto walked slowly through the place where he had grown up and looked with a certain nostalgia at the houses that at this moment were completely abandoned due to the invasion, but this did not matter to him and he continued walking to see the house where his adoptive mother lived. With a small smile, Naruto walked towards her, took a deep breath, and grabbed the doorknob. When he did, he saw a completely empty house. Without saying anything, he walked to the dining room, which made him smile. Naruto lightly touched the dining room chairs with nostalgia on his face, sat down in one of them, and looked towards a wall where there were height markings on them, which made him smile. Brother, I've grown again today. I think I've become Lilith, don't you think? Naruto remembered his younger sister's voice with slight sadness, but he smiled, trying to prevent tears from escaping his eyes. When we grow up, Lilith, you and I will be world-renowned, you'll see. His sister Isabel's voice echoed in his head again, making him look up at the ceiling with a nostalgic smile. It seems we did it, doesn't it, Isabel? Naruto said to himself, but suddenly he became alert upon hearing a sound coming from the kitchen. Before he could do anything, Naruto was surprised to see his adoptive mother, Madeline. She looked as beautiful as ever. When she saw him, she smiled sweetly, but Naruto didn't return the gesture. Instead, he frowned. Madeline placed a cup of coffee on the table and sat down opposite Naruto, still wearing that smile. What the hell are you doing here? Shouldn't you have died or evacuated the city? Naruto said with a slight hatred in his voice, but despite that, Madeline continued to smile in the same way while shaking her head. I honestly expected to have died with all this commotion, but it seems Ymir still wants me alive just to pay for my sins, Madeline said with a small smile on her face as she took a sip of her coffee. Are you telling me you stayed here just to die? Doesn't a piece of scum like you have even a shred of self-pity? Naruto said hatefully, but Madeline didn't seem affected by his words. The truth is, there was no point in continuing to live after I lost you all, Madeline said, slightly surprising Naruto, but this only made him angrier. Now you come up with that when you were the bitch who sold us out to the devil, Naruto said with fury in his voice, but Madeline denied it. You're wrong, my Naru. What happened that day was a mistake. The Marleyan soldiers came here because someone told them you had royal blood. I denied it at first, but they still didn't believe me. An elegant man showed proof that you possessed that blood. Outwardly, I pretended to be disgusted by you, but inwardly, I was trying to convince myself that you were still my children, Madeline said with a sweet smile on her face. Naruto looked at her, searching for any trace of deceit, but found none. TCH, don't call me that, but who was this man? Said Naruto, referring mainly to the nickname she gave him, since that's what she called him when he was a child. I didn't know at the time, but from what I could find out, he was a messenger from the Tiber. Apparently, they knew his real parents. You already know that, right? I'm not your real mother, Madeline said with a dull look at the last part, while Naruto was surprised by the Tiber thing. TCH, I know that. That just gives you another reason to sell us out, doesn't it? Naruto said with a frown, but to his surprise, Madeline smiled, though tears threatened to fall from her eyes, making Naruto feel slightly bad for seeing her in that state. You're wrong, my little Naru. I still remember the day I found the three of you. You looked so helpless in the cold night. When I saw you, I knew you would be a pillar in my life, Madeline said with a happy smile on her face as tears streamed down her cheeks. If that's the case, why did you hand Marley over to us? Naruto said coldly in his voice, while Madeline looked at him, breaking her perpetual smile and giving into tears. I was afraid, you know. What would happen to me if I covered for you? But I realized the moment I lost you that my life had no meaning anymore. After all, how could you call me your mother if I couldn't protect you? Madeline said with tears in her eyes, making Naruto realize what she meant. That's what you meant when I asked you for help that time, right? Naruto said with a neutral look on his face, while Madeline nodded. I told you this before, didn't I, Naru? When people lose their purpose, they try to fill the void it leaves in their soul, Madeline said, making Naruto not fully understand her. People need something to keep going, a family, love, money, faith, or a mission, Madeline said, lightly wiping away her tears. What are you trying to get at? Naruto said, looking at Madeline with a frown. Well, when you left, my purpose was lost. I no longer saw the point in continuing to live. I tried to commit suicide several times, but I wasn't brave enough. But one day, when you and Lilith were presented to us Eldians, it made me happy to know that two of you were still alive. My little ones survived and became great people. It really doesn't matter what you've done. I'm proud of you, Madeline said with a small smile on her face. Naruto said nothing about it, causing Madeline to get up from her seat and, to the blonde's surprise, kneel down and cry in his lap. Naru, I know the path you've traveled to get here has been difficult, and I'm not one to beg for your forgiveness, but I just wanted to tell you that. I'm very proud to have been your mother. I know you can change the world, Madeline said through tears, while Naruto had light tears on his face. Thank you, Mom, Naruto said with a sad look on his face as he stroked his adoptive mother's hair. Upon hearing this, Madeline cried even harder, causing Naruto to worry. But out of nowhere, Madeline hugged Naruto, burying her face in his chest. Naruto was surprised at first, but then he returned the hug. Mom, I met someone, you know. She's kind of like you. I wish you could have met her, Naruto said, looking at his hand, which was stained with blood, and it wasn't from the previous battle. If Naru loves her, she must be a wonderful woman. I would have liked to have grandchildren, you know, to be able to spoil them. And for them to call me grandmother, Madeline said with a sad smile on her face as her eyes seemed to fade little by little and her voice broke. Naruto saw this with tears in his eyes. Suddenly, moonlight entered through the window, and Naruto saw the floor covered in blood and a gunshot wound in his mother's abdomen. Why didn't you tell me? Naruto said with tears in his eyes, while Madeline smiled sadly at him and wiped his tears with her hand. It wasn't necessary for you to worry about me. I just wanted Naru to forgive me, and to see you one last time. Naru, it's time for you to go. Your friends are waiting for you, Madeline said with a sad and tired smile as her eyes closed forever. Naruto cried at his mother's death. Carrying her, he took her to his room and laid her down. He took out the Marley headband he always wore on his arm and placed it in her hands. Taking one last look, Naruto left the house and dried the tears in his eyes. You, stop right there or I'll shoot, said a female voice that Naruto recognized very well. Behind him was Charlotte with an assault rifle pointed at him. Charlotte, Naruto said in a blank voice, causing the aforementioned to be surprised and lower her weapon. Dad, what are you doing dressed like them? You're betraying us, Charlotte said in a broken voice, making Naruto look at her coldly. And if that's the case, what, are you going to shoot me? Naruto said coldly, making Charlotte tremble slightly for a few moments, but finally she dropped the rifle. I figured as much, said Naruto, starting to walk, ready to head towards the airship, but before he could, Charlotte stopped him, grabbing his arm tightly. Take me with you. Don't leave me here alone please, Charlotte said with desperation in her voice, making Naruto look at her sadly. Where she led me is where demons live, it's dangerous, Naruto said, trying not to involve her in this, but she didn't care. I don't care, you're the only family I have left, I won't let you go so easily, Charlotte said desperately, making Naruto look at her sadly and sigh. Okay, let's go, you're the only family I have left too, said Naruto, taking Charlotte on his shoulders and using the 3D equipment to reach the airship. Moments later, Naruto arrived at the airship with Charlotte, much to the curiosity of some in the Legion. He looked at Zeke, who was sitting in a corner with guards watching over him, and Levi nearby, who said nothing upon seeing him, simply looking at him coldly. Naruto also said nothing and sat against a wall next to Annie, who was already there. Charlotte followed him and sat beside him, snuggling up to him as if she were scared of the people who were there. Huh, Naruto, who is she? Said Hange next to Armin, who were curiously watching Charlotte, who grabbed Naruto's arm tightly, making Naruto smile wearily, as the heat of the battle had taken its toll. She is my daughter, Naruto said with a smile, making Charlotte look at him with an embarrassed expression, and Hange nodded, taking the answer as if it were obvious. History knows, said Sasha, who was there, this time. She said it mockingly, making Naruto smile at that and shake his head. Oh, looks like someone will be sleeping on the couch soon, Connie said mockingly, while Naruto smiled at the teasing. Who is History? Charlotte asked curiously, making Naruto stroke her head as if she were a little girl. My wife, in a way your mother, Naruto said with a smile, causing Charlotte to look at Naruto's hand and see the ring he used to transform with a surprised expression. I have a mother. I can't wait to meet her, Charlotte said with a look of happiness on her face, making Annie, Sasha, Connie, Hanjay and Armin smile at the teenager's reaction. Where are Eren and the others? Naruto said seriously, changing the subject, making Charlotte recognize the name. He hasn't returned yet. Wait, he's coming, Sasha said, pointing to Eren and Mikasa entering through the airship door. Naruto nodded when he saw them and returned the gesture, but before anything could happen, Levi spoke. You look like you crawled out of a latrine. Disgusting, Levi said, making Eren look at him. Captain, Eren said, but before he could say anything else, Levi kicked him in the face, sending him crashing into the airship wall. Mikasa was about to do something, but Armin stopped her. First we're going to arrest you, then there will be time for talks, Levi said, giving the order to his soldiers. That's fine, Naruto should have told him everything he knew, that's all, Eren said with a dull look on his face, making Levi look at him sympathetically. Your face, I've seen that same face in the underground city so many times it would make my eyes rot, don't tell me that you, Levi said, but was interrupted by Naruto who spoke. Don't worry, Zeke is here with us, said Naruto, pointing to Zeke who looked at his brother. A short time later, Naruto left the room, leaving Charlotte with Annie, who was like an older sister to her. Naruto then left with Connie and Sasha to continue welcoming the other soldiers. Jean, get in, said Connie, extending her hand to Jean, who, seeing his comrades safe, felt relief and, seeing the blonde boy, nodded towards him, as did Naruto. Who else is yet to arrive? Jean said, looking at the soldiers who were there. One squad hasn't returned and 6 of ours were killed, Sasha told Jean, who nodded seriously. I see. Damn it, Jean said, thinking of his fallen comrades, but his thoughts were interrupted by another soldier, who was Flock if Naruto remembered correctly. Compared to the damage done to the enemy, that's nothing, Flock said with vigor and joy at his victory against Marley. This victory is ours. The revived Eldian Empire has won the first battle, Flock declared, prompting cheers from the other soldiers, while Naruto watched with a blank stare. So, the first battle, huh? I wonder how many more there are and how many more will have to die, Jean said with a serious look while Sasha stared towards the door, thinking about his words. Connie, seeing the tense atmosphere, hugged both Jean and Sasha, slightly surprising them. Well, for now, at least the 3 of us are still alive. I care about our comrades, but you 2 are important to me, Connie said with a sad look, making Sasha smile and Jean look surprised. Naruto saw this scene and ignored it and sat down near the door. He was going to sleep, but a noise disturbed him. The other soldiers didn't notice this. Naruto watched curiously as a small hand clung to the bottom of the airship door. Suddenly Naruto saw Gabi turn and position herself ready to aim at the soldiers, but before she could pull the trigger her body tensed completely. The other soldiers watched this confused, but then they saw Naruto whose eyes were glowing faintly and a sun pattern was drawn on them. What are you waiting for? Arrest her, damn it, if you don't want to die, Naruto said with a frown, and Jean ordered the soldiers to disarm her and tie her up with a rope. That was close, thanks Naruto, Connie said, looking at the blonde boy who nodded and began to breathe irregularly. TCH, I need a nap, said Naruto, getting up. He looked at Falco, who was barely climbing through the door. Falco felt fear when he saw him. Naruto didn't say anything and gave him a signal. Falco was also imprisoned. Naruto looked at Gabi, who was looking at him with surprise and then with anger. Naruto said nothing and touched Gabi's head, knocking her unconscious. Without further ado, Naruto walked towards the room where Levi, Zeke, Eren, Annie, Charlotte, Mikasa, Armin, and one other person were. Oh Captain Naruto, I see you're still alive, said a short-haired blonde woman wearing the Marley uniform and a fake beard on her face. Yelena, it's also a pleasure to see you alive, said Naruto as he sat down next to Charlotte. What's all the commotion out there? Levi said with a frown, making Naruto look at him with disinterest. 2 Eldian child soldiers from Marley managed to climb up here. One of them almost killed one of their own. If the coordinate hadn't been used, they would now be mourning a death, Naruto said in a cold voice, causing Zeke to be slightly surprised by this information. Who is this, Naruto? Zeke asked curiously, making Naruto look at him. From Gabi and Falco of course, said Naruto, while Zeke sighed at this last part. Naruto, on the other hand, got up from where he was, but stopped when he saw Hanjay enter the room. Oh, you look horrible, Naruto-san, Hanjay said, looking at the blonde boy who seemed very tired. I just need to rest. This war thing isn't for me, said Naruto as he left the room, while behind him Annie and Charlotte followed him. Curiously, neither Annie nor Mikasa had spoken to each other, but Annie lightly greeted Armin, who returned the greeting. Passing by where the soldiers were, Naruto saw that some were looking at him as if he were some kind of king or leader. They were certainly not far from the truth since, as Naruto was married to Historia, he became king of the walls, but he did not like being recognized in that way. Walking, Naruto entered a room with Annie and Charlotte, who saw that the blonde boy, upon entering, threw himself onto the bed and fell into a deep sleep, much to Charlotte's amusement. There was a bunk bed, so Annie could have slept on top, but instead, she sat in a chair and took out a book that was on the table. Without saying anything, Charlotte snuggled close to Naruto, who instinctively hugged her. All of this was seen by Annie, who had a small, almost invisible smile on her face. Annie, nay, did you know that Dad had a wife? Charlotte said in a low voice. Annie stopped reading to answer her question. Yes, in fact, I was a witness at their wedding, Annie said, looking at Charlotte, who looked at her, understanding what she said. You know, Annie, nay, I always thought you liked Daddy, Charlotte said, making Annie smile, but shake her head. No, ever since I've known him he's always tried to protect me, to me he's like an older brother, Annie said, looking at the blonde man who was fast asleep. I see, said Charlotte, and without saying anything else, she proceeded to fall asleep with her father while Annie continued reading. With Naruto coordinate dimension. Naruto stood in a vast desert. Beside him was Ymir, who was just looking at the sky where the paths of the coordinate were beginning to join. It's almost time, isn't it? Ymir, Naruto said, looking up at the sky, as did Ymir, who didn't say anything but simply nodded. I'm going to where Frida is, Ymir. Soon I'll be able to free you from this pain. Don't worry, trust me, Naruto said, crouching down to Ymir's level and giving her a hug, which made Ymir smile. I trust you, Naruto, Ymir said as Naruto nodded and began to walk. As he did, the landscape changed slightly, as the great desert that had been there was now replaced by a room that seemed to be made for royalty. Naruto sat down in one of the chairs there. Naruto saw that on the bed in the room was a tall woman with long black hair and white skin. She was wearing a simple white dress. The woman had tears in her eyes while she grabbed her head as if it hurt. Naruto approached her and touched her head, making her aware of his presence. Upon seeing him, Naruto smiled at her, and the woman, noticing this, smiled happily as the pain gradually subsided. How are you, Frida? Do the ghosts of the past still haunt your innocent mind? Naruto said with a friendly smile. Frida smiled gratefully and nodded. Naruto. Here again, Frida said coldly, while Naruto smiled at her attitude. You know you shouldn't keep treating me like this, after all you're my sister-in-law, Naruto joked. Frida frowned at this comment. Just shut up, will you? I didn't need to know that, stupid blondie, Frida said, annoyance in her voice. Hey, come on, I try to be a good brother-in-law, but you don't accept my affection, what a bad sister you are, said Naruto with a mocking smile, teasing her. Frida sighed at this. Just tell me what you're doing here, Frida said, making Naruto get serious and sit down on Frida's bed, much to her curiosity. Well, I wanted to help you with your problem, besides, the plan is about to begin, Naruto said seriously, while Frida was slightly surprised. I understand, so from what I understand, when you obtain the original power you'll be able to go back further, right? Frida said seriously, making Naruto nod. Just making a connection with you uses up a lot of energy, going further back will be very tiring for me if I don't have the original coordinates, said Naruto as he looked at Frida, who looked him in the eyes and frowned. You're doubting this, aren't you, Naruto? Frida said, making the blonde boy nod. The truth is, in a way, everything is going well in my life. I married your sister, I have a daughter, but I know that all of this won't last forever. I want them to be with me forever and to be able to protect them. It's selfish, don't you think? Putting my own good before that of humanity. Naruto said with desperation in his voice, which made Frida approach him and take his hand. Well, if your plan goes well, my sister could live a normal and happy life. Don't you think that's even better? Naruto, I know the burden you carry on your shoulders is very heavy, but you'll see that when you complete your task, the world will become a better place, Frida said with a smile towards the blonde boy, who smiled back and looked at his hands. Yes, I will destroy the cycle of karma and restore the natural order of humanity, Naruto said with a serious look, and Frida smiled at that. That's my brother-in-law, but changing the subject, Naruto, you haven't been able to see the future. Or see the past itself, Frida said, making the blonde boy shake his head. No, the strange thing is that everything is confusing from here on out and all I can see is darkness, that only means that I completed my task Naruto said, but he was interrupted by Frida, who looked at him seriously. You died trying, Frida said seriously, making Naruto nod in the same way.